Hey everyone, and welcome to Nighttime Stories. I'm here to help you drift off into a peaceful sleep. Let me know where you're watching from. I always love seeing how far these stories reach. Now, get comfortable and relax. Working the night shift at the care home had always been a strange mix of boring and unsettling. There were long hours of silence broken only by the sounds of residents coughing in their sleep, televisions muttering behind closed doors, or the occasional shuffle of slippers against the linoleum. The halls smelled faintly of disinfectant and boiled vegetables, a smell that never seemed to leave my clothes even after washing. I usually spent the quietest hours between midnight and dawn in the small security office at the back, drinking lukewarm coffee and staring at the monitors until my eyes blurred. I used to tell myself I was good at night work because nothing scared me. That was before the night I looked up at the monitors and saw something I still cannot explain. It was close to 2 a.m, the time when everything usually settled into a dull rhythm. I had leaned back in the chair, rubbing my temples and trying to stay awake, when movement flickered across the screen. At first I thought it was just a shadow, maybe a resident wandering out of bed, but when I leaned closer, the sight hit me like a punch. In the feed from the east hallway camera, a man was crawling across the ceiling. His body was pressed flat against the tiles, arms and legs bent at impossible angles, moving with the kind of slow, deliberate precision you only see in spiders. His head twisted unnaturally as if his neck had no bones, face blank, eyes wide and dark. For a moment I sat frozen, unable to breathe. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes, even tapped the side of the monitor as if the screen itself had glitched. But he was still there, crawling steadily along the ceiling as dust sifted down with each movement of his limbs. My mouth went dry. I tried to convince myself it was a prank. Some resident who had climbed onto furniture and was somehow balanced up there, but deep down I knew no one could move like that. Adrenaline finally kicked me out of the chair. I grabbed the flashlight from the desk, nearly dropping it, and ran to the east hall. My shoes squeaked on the waxed floors, the sound too loud in the silence. When I skidded to a stop under the camera, the hall stretched out in front of me, empty, no figure clinging to the ceiling, no strange presence, just fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and framed doors lined neatly down the corridor. I lifted the flashlight, shining it up toward the ceiling tiles. Nothing, just the same bland panels I had seen 1,000 times before. My heart was hammering so hard it hurt, and I laughed under my breath, sharp and nervous. Maybe it had been fatigue, a trick of the camera, but as I lowered the beam, I noticed it. A thin layer of dust had fallen across the polished floor beneath the camera. Fresh, like someone had shaken the tiles loose from above. I crouched and ran my finger through it, and the dust clung damp to my skin. I looked up again, and for one terrible second I thought I saw the panel shift, just the faintest tremor as if something had pressed against it from the other side. I stumbled back, almost dropping the flashlight. My first thought was to get out of the hall, back to the office, back to where at least there was a locked door between me and whatever the hell I had just seen. But I forced myself to breathe, to slow down, to remind myself that I was the only staff on duty this late. If one of the residents had woken, if someone needed help, I had to keep it together. That was my job. Still, walking back down the corridor, I kept glancing up every few steps, half expecting to see a pale hand pushing through the tiles above me. The silence was suffocating, every light hum and creak sounding like it hid something more. By the time I pushed back into the security room, sweat had soaked through my shirt. I sat down heavily in the chair, set the flashlight on the desk, and forced myself to look at the monitors again. Every hallway was still, every resident's door was closed, nothing out of place. Except when my eyes landed back on the east hallway feed, I saw a faint dust haze still hanging in the air, slowly drifting down as if disturbed just moments before. I told myself to breathe, to think. Maybe I had imagined the crawling figure. Maybe the dust was just coincidence. but my hands would not stop shaking. I tried calling the building manager, but it went to voicemail. I thought about phoning the police, then laughed bitterly at the thought. What would I even say? "Hello, officer. There is a man crawling across the ceiling tiles in the old folks' home. Please come quickly." They would think I had lost my mind. I spent the rest of that shift staring at the monitors, waiting for it to return. Every flicker of static made my chest tighten. Every shadow made me grip the edge of the desk so hard my knuckles ached. But nothing came back. By the time the day staff arrived, I was pale, exhausted, and jumpy as hell. I did not mention what I had seen. I wanted to believe it had just been a hallucination brought on by lack of sleep. But when I walked the East Hall one last time before leaving, I saw another detail I had missed in the panic. Right above the door to room 12, the ceiling tile was cracked, as if something had pressed too hard against it from above. Fine trails of dust marked the floor directly beneath it, leading almost all the way to the exit. I stood there staring until one of the day nurses asked if I was okay. I forced a smile, lied through my teeth, and left the building with my stomach knotted. Back in my car, I sat gripping the steering wheel, telling myself over and over that it was nothing, that I was just tired, that the mind could play cruel tricks in the middle of the night. But no matter how many times I said it, I could still see him in my head. That man crawling with insect precision across the ceiling tiles, head twisting, face blank, eyes locked on me through the camera. And the worst part was knowing it had stopped directly over a resident's room, just long enough to peer down. The next night I came in early, determined to prove to myself that I had only imagined what I saw. Maybe if I caught the monitors before my brain was clouded with exhaustion, I would realize it had all been some trick of tired eyes. The day staff filtered out as usual, handing me a few notes about which residents had been restless and which needed extra care. Nothing unusual, nothing out of place. I made myself a fresh pot of coffee, sat down in the security room, and tried to focus on the mundane details of the night shift. For a while it worked. The halls were quiet. The cameras showed nothing but closed doors, and the occasional flicker of movement when a nurse checked on someone. I told myself I was ridiculous for letting one strange image shake me so badly, but as the night wore on, a nagging unease grew heavier in my stomach, like my body remembered even if my brain was trying to rationalize. It was just after midnight when I noticed the dust again, not on the monitor this time, but in the East Hall itself. I had gone to do rounds, flashlight sweeping across the tiled floor, when I saw it. Faint trails of powder drifting down from above, spiraling lazily in the air. I tilted the beam upward, heart already racing. The ceiling looked normal, flat and white, but as I stood there, another pinch of dust sifted down, landing on my shoulder. "God damn it," I whispered, brushing it off, even though I knew it was not the ceiling collapsing. Something was moving above me. I forced myself to keep walking, pretending to be calm. Every few steps I flicked the flashlight upward, scanning for cracks, for gaps in the tiles, for any hint that something was crawling along just out of sight. I wanted to believe I was imagining it, but the more I tried, the more certain I became that I was not alone in that hall. Back in the office, I replayed the camera feed from the east corridor, squinting at the grainy black and white footage. At first, nothing stood out, just the empty stretch of hall. Then, almost too subtle to notice, one of the tiles trembled, barely a shift, like the weight of something pressing gently against it. My pulse roared in my ears as I leaned closer. Another tile moved, a ripple traveling down the length of the hall. I slammed the monitor off, unable to watch another second. My breath came fast and uneven, and I pressed my hands to my face, whispering to myself to calm down. But the silence outside the office had shifted. It was too heavy, too expectant, like the air itself was waiting. The first scream came from room 9. It was sharp, high-pitched, and desperate enough to send me bolting from the chair without thinking. I sprinted down the hall, heart slamming, and burst into the room. "Mrs." Peters was sitting up in bed, eyes wild, pointing at the ceiling above her. "He's up there," she gasped. "The man on the ceiling." He was watching me. The words froze me to the spot. I wanted to tell her she was dreaming, that it was a night terror, but she was wide awake and trembling. I shone the flashlight upward. The tiles looked intact, but even as I stared, another faint cascade of dust drifted down over the bedspread. I got her calmed eventually, murmuring reassurances I barely believed, and promised to keep the hall lights brighter. But as soon as I stepped back out into the corridor, I heard it again. Another scream, this time from room 14, then another from room 11. One by one, the residents began to cry out, some shouting about a man above them, others too incoherent to form words. It was chaos. I rushed from door to door, checking on them, soothing, lying through my teeth. But with each room I entered, I found the same detail. Dust on the sheets, dust on the floor, dust floating lazily down from the ceiling. By the time the noise settled, my nerves were frayed to nothing. The halls smelled like fear and old sweat. I collapsed back into the office chair, trying to process what the hell was happening. I thought about calling the on-call nurse manager, but what could I say? That every single resident in the East Wing swore a man was crawling over their rooms. That dust was falling from the ceiling like it was snowing indoors. I knew how it would sound. Instead, I sat there shaking, staring at the monitors even though I did not want to see what they might show. I could not ignore the possibility that every scream, every terrified cry, was not some collective dream or delusion. They had all felt him too. At around 3 a.m, when things had finally gone quiet again, I walked the East Hall one last time. My flashlight beam shook with each breath. The floor was littered with dust, more than I had ever seen before, clinging to the waxed linoleum in fine gray layers. Above me, the tiles looked warped, as if something heavy had pressed against them again and again. I stopped outside room 12, the same door where I had noticed the cracked tile the night before. This time the crack was wider, a jagged split running across the plaster. I reached up and touched it without thinking. The panel was ice cold, colder than anything else in the building. My fingertips stung from the chill. I pulled my hand back quickly, heart pounding. The silence pressed in, so thick it made my head ring. I whispered into the empty hall, voice shaking, "What the fuck are you?" He said knew him. The ceiling above me creaked in response, slow and deliberate, like weight shifting from one limb to another. Then, silence again. I backed away, flashlight beam darting nervously along the ceiling tiles as I moved toward the exit. My skin prickled as if eyes were boring down into me, following every step. By the time I slammed back into the office and locked the door, I was shaking so hard I had to grip the desk to steady myself. I sat there until dawn, watching the monitors with the sound turned low, waiting for the moment the sun rose and I could hand the nightmare off to someone else. When the day staff arrived, I pretended everything had been fine. I smiled too hard, shrugged off their questions, and walked out into the morning light feeling hollowed out. But even as I drove home, I kept glancing at the ceiling of my car, half expecting to see a pale hand press through the fabric. And when I finally crawled into bed, exhausted beyond reason, I lay awake staring up, waiting for the sound of dust falling. Because now I knew for certain, whatever I had seen was not some hallucination from fatigue. The residents had seen him too. And worse, he was not just moving through the halls. He was watching us, one room at a time, waiting for something I could not yet name. By the third night, I was already dreading the shift before I even clocked in. My stomach had been in knots all day, and by the time I pulled into the parking lot, my hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel. The building looked the same as always, squat and gray against the dark, but it felt different now, like the walls were holding in something that did not want to be contained. I almost turned the car back on and drove away. But rent does not pay itself, and I needed this job more than I wanted to admit. I told myself I would keep the monitors on but not stare too hard. If I focused on paperwork, checked the rounds like normal, maybe I could survive the night without falling apart. That plan lasted about 2 hours. By midnight, the halls were alive with noise. It started with one voice, sharp and panicked, echoing from room 9, then another from room 15. Then it spread like a wave, residents crying out in fear, some shouting words I could not make out, others just screaming. The sound ripped through the halls, overlapping and chaotic, and I bolted from the office with my flashlight, heart hammering. When I reached the East Hall, the air felt heavy, charged with something that made my skin prickle. Doors rattled as residents pounded on them from inside. One woman shouted that there was someone in the ceiling above her, scratching. Another sobbed that a man had leaned down through the tiles to watch her sleep. The sheer collective terror of it was enough to make me feel dizzy. I ran from room to room, trying to calm them, telling each person they were safe, that no one was there, even though I could feel the lie burning on my tongue. The tiles above looked cracked and warped, dust drifting down in clouds so thick I coughed. My flashlight beam caught faint grooves along some of the panels, shallow claw marks that had never been there before. By the time the noise finally tapered off, I was soaked in sweat. My shirt clung to my back. My throat was raw from shouting reassurances. I slumped against the wall in the middle of the hall, breathing hard, and for the first time I realized that I could not keep pretending this was in my head. They were seeing him too. Every scream, every terrified story lined up with the truth I had already witnessed on the cameras. Back in the office, I forced myself to rewind the footage. My hands shook so badly it took 3 tries to get the right timestamp. The monitors flickered, showing the empty hall. Then he appeared, crawling into view with that same unnatural precision, arms and legs bending in ways they should not. His body hugged the ceiling, pale skin stretched tight over long limbs, face angled down. He paused above each door. That was the part that made bile rise in my throat. He would stop, cock his head as if listening, then lower it slightly toward the cracks. Dust rained down each time, confirming what the residents had felt. One by one, he lingered, moving on only after several seconds, until he reached the end of the hall and vanished off screen. I sat frozen, staring at the screen until my eyes watered. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to run into the night and never return. But I could not move. I felt like if I left, if I dared turn my back, he would drop down and crawl after me. It took the rising dawn to break me from that paralysis. When the day staff arrived, I shoved the tapes into a drawer, unwilling to let anyone else see them, terrified of what they would say. I went home hollow, barely able to keep my hands steady enough to unlock my door. That morning, I collapsed into bed, too tired to shower or eat. I pulled the blankets tight and tried to bury myself in the idea that the sun meant safety, but as soon as I closed my eyes, I dreamed of him, crawling above me, staring through the ceiling, waiting. I woke, gasping, drenched in cold sweat, and could not shake the sense that the dream had not been just a dream. I forced myself back that night, telling myself maybe it would be different, maybe it was some one-off nightmare that had passed. But as soon as the clock struck midnight, the screaming started again. Louder this time. More residents at once, their voices blending into a chorus of raw panic. I sprinted through the halls, heart pounding, and at one point, as I tried to calm a man in room 11, I heard it myself. A faint skittering above the tiles, sharp like nails dragging across plaster. Then a creak, a heavy shift. My flashlight caught the corner of the ceiling just as dust spilled down like ash. I did not need to see him to know he was there. That was the moment I stopped trying to explain it away. This was not just shadows or stress or tricks of the brain. Something was crawling through the ceilings of that building, something that watched the residents with hungry patience. And worse, it seemed to be getting bolder. When the night finally ended, I could barely stand. My hands trembled as I tried to clock out. The other staff looked at me strangely. but I mumbled something about not sleeping well and stumbled out into the daylight. At home, I tried to shut it out. I made coffee, turned on the TV, did anything to drown the memory. But when I went into my bedroom, something stopped me cold. On the ceiling above my bed, faint but unmistakable, were scratches. Long, shallow claw marks etched into the paint, dust flaking down to the carpet below. I stood staring up until my vision blurred, my throat tight. There was no way to pretend now. It was not staying at the care home. It had followed me. I told myself I was imagining it. That was the first lie. The second was that maybe some maintenance issue had caused the marks on my ceiling. Old beams shifting, paint cracking, rodents scratching. Anything but what I already knew in my gut. But lying to myself only lasted so long. By the time I returned to work that night, I felt like I was carrying lead in my chest. Every breath was tight, every step heavier than it should have been. The building seemed quieter than usual, which somehow made it worse. No chatter from the day staff as they left, no clatter from the kitchen, just silence stretching down every hall. I tried to distract myself by doing paperwork, but my hands shook too badly to hold the pen steady. The clock seemed frozen, each minute dragging into the next, the weight of midnight pressing closer with every tick. When the screaming started, it was like an alarm going off in my bones. This time it was almost every room at once. A wall of noise hit me as I stepped into the East Hall. Residents pounded on doors, shouted for help, called out about a man watching them from the ceiling. I felt dizzy, like the air had been sucked out of the corridor. Dust rained steadily, thicker than before, floating through the beam of my flashlight in a way that made it impossible to pretend it was normal. I forced myself to look up, even though every instinct screamed not to. At first I saw only warped tiles, hairline cracks. But then for the first time I saw movement with my own eyes, not through the cameras. A tile flexed downward as though a hand pressed against it from above, then another. The surface rippled with weight shifting across it. Something large was crawling just above us, the ceiling bending slightly under its passage. The residents' cries grew sharper, overlapping in pure panic. I wanted to run, to tear out of the building and never return, but I was frozen, rooted to the spot as the tiles above bulged again, closer now. A faint groan echoed through the hall as if the structure itself protested under the strain. I caught my breath and whispered, without meaning to, "What the fuck?" The movement paused. For a long moment the ceiling was still, silence hanging heavy except for the frightened voices behind the doors. Then a soft scratching started, traveling slowly across the panels, deliberate and slow, like claws dragged intentionally to let me know it was aware of me. The sound passed directly overhead, circling above me until I finally stumbled backward, heart thundering. I did not sleep when I went home that morning. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the ceiling, too afraid to even enter my bedroom. My hands would not stop shaking, and my coffee went cold untouched. When the sun finally dipped again, I knew with sick certainty that whatever was inside that building was not staying there anymore. It was coming with me. That night, back at work, I checked the footage again. I should not have. I could have looked away, pretended not to care. But curiosity, mixed with dread, pulled me back to the monitors. The man was there as always, crawling across the ceiling with impossible precision, head swiveling in jerks as he studied each room below. But this time, he stopped in the center of the hall and turned. His head twisted at an angle that made my stomach churn, neck bending too far. His face angled directly at the camera. For the first time I saw his features clearly. Pale skin stretched tight over sharp bones, eyes black pits reflecting light in a way that was wrong, smile thin and cruel. I slammed the monitor off and sat there gasping, my hands covering my mouth. I kept whispering no to myself like repetition could undo what I had seen, but deep down I knew it was too late. He had noticed me. The evidence followed me home again. That morning I found new marks on the ceiling above my bed, longer this time, deeper, as though claws had raked the plaster with more force. A small pile of dust had collected on the sheets. I stripped the bed and slept on the couch, but that night I woke to a faint creak above me, the ceiling of the living room groaning under weight that should not have been there. I wanted to tell someone, to beg for help, but the words caught in my throat. Who would believe me? My co-workers already thought I was jumpy. The residents' complaints had been dismissed as dementia and nightmares. If I tried to explain what I saw, they would only write me off as tired or unstable. And maybe they would be right. Maybe I was losing it. But the scratches on my ceiling were real. The dust in my bed was real. And the man's face staring at the camera was real. The next shift was worse than all the others combined. Midnight came and the screams began again, louder and more desperate. I ran into the East Hall and stopped cold. Dust poured from the ceiling like ash falling in thick clouds. Tiles buckled visibly now, sagging under weight that moved just out of sight. The sound of crawling was louder too, a wet shuffling that echoed through the corridor. Residents cried and pounded, their voices overlapping in a frenzy of terror. I forced myself forward, flashlight trembling in my hand. As I passed room 12, a tile cracked loudly overhead and a pale hand punched through, fingers impossibly long, nails jagged. It flexed once, curling against the air, before withdrawing back into the dark. I stumbled backward, heart slamming against my ribs, bile rising in my throat. The hole it left gaped black above me, dust raining down in a steady stream. I backed away slowly, my light fixed on that hole until I was safely at the far end of the hall. Back in the office, I locked the door and sat shaking. I knew then that it would not stop. Whatever it was, it had grown bolder each night, pressing closer, making itself known. And now it was not content to stay in the ceiling. It was reaching down. By dawn, I had made a decision. I could not just survive night after night of this, waiting for the moment it finally decided to drop fully into the halls or into my room at home. I needed answers, or at least some way to fight back. But deep down, another thought festered, one I could not shake. It already knew where I lived. It was in my ceilings, which meant no matter what I did, no matter where I went, the man who crawled across the ceiling had already chosen me. By the time I reached my apartment that morning, I was running on fumes. Every nerve in my body buzzed with the memory of that pale hand breaking through the tile. I kept looking at the ceilings in every room like they might crack open at any moment. The walls felt too thin, the air too heavy. I made coffee just to have something to do with my hands, but I barely tasted it. When I finally gathered the courage to enter my bedroom, I found fresh dust scattered on the floor, thin gray streaks traced down from the ceiling directly above my bed. The claw marks were deeper now, fresh gouges running across the plaster like someone had dragged nails from one end to the other. My sheets were coated with flakes of paint, disturbed like something had shifted just overhead while I was gone. I dragged the mattress off the bed frame and shoved it against the wall in the living room. I thought maybe if I avoided sleeping beneath the marked spot, I could find some peace. But that night, when I finally passed out on the couch, I woke to a faint creak overhead. My living room ceiling groaned, just like the halls at the care home. I lay frozen, every muscle locked, staring up. For a moment I thought it might be the upstairs neighbor, but then I remembered that the apartment above me had been vacant for months, undergoing renovations. There was no one living there. No one human, at least. The next night at work, the residents were even worse. The screams came earlier, just after 11, echoing from both wings this time. The sound tore through me, a chorus of terror that left no doubt they were all experiencing the same thing. When I checked the monitors, my blood ran cold. The man was not just in the East Hall anymore. He was crawling through every corridor, methodically moving from one ceiling to the next, pausing above every room, his limbs bent at impossible angles, fingers curling against the tiles like claws, his face tilted toward each door, listening. I could not breathe watching it. It was like seeing a predator study its prey before striking. At dawn, when I stumbled back home, I found the bathroom light on. I knew I had turned it off before work. Inside, the mirror was fogged as though someone had taken a shower. But the air was cold, damp with a faint musty smell, like wet plaster and dust. Scrawled across the condensation in shaky letters was one word: look up. My knees almost buckled. I forced myself to tilt my head, dread clawing up my spine. Above the bathroom sink, directly above me, the plaster bulged slightly, a faint crack running across the surface. I did not shower. I did not even turn the light off. I walked straight out and sat on the edge of my bed with my head in my hands, shaking. I wanted to leave, to drive until the gas ran out and never look back. But some part of me knew it would not matter. Whatever this thing was, it had already attached itself to me. That night at work, I kept my eyes on the monitors again, even though I wanted nothing more than to smash them and blind myself to what was happening. The man moved differently this time, slower, more deliberate. When he stopped above room 9, his face turned again toward the camera. He pressed himself so close to the lens that all I could see was one black, bottomless eye filling the screen. The monitor fizzed with static, and the lights in the office flickered. I slammed the power button, heart hammering. When I looked up, the ceiling tile above the desk shifted ever so slightly, dust sifting down onto the paperwork. I left the office and sat in the hall instead, too afraid to be boxed in. Residents whimpered behind closed doors, and I whispered reassurances I did not believe. My flashlight beam shook against the walls, my throat tight. I knew he was above me. I could feel it. When I got home that morning, exhaustion dragged me down. I thought maybe I could just collapse without thinking. I shut the curtains, locked every door twice, and curled up on the couch. For a few hours I slept deeply, but at exactly 3:17 I woke gasping. The ceiling above me groaned again. This time I could not stop myself from looking. Slowly, silently, I tilted my head back. He was there. A pale face pressed against the plaster, the outline of it bulging down, features distorted by the thin barrier between us. The eyes gleamed black, unblinking. The mouth stretched into that same grotesque smile, wide enough to show every crooked tooth. I could not move. My body locked up, heart slamming, breath caught in my throat. The face lingered for what felt like hours, watching me. Then, with a soft scraping sound, it shifted back, vanishing into the ceiling. When I finally found the strength to move, I bolted out of the apartment. I sat in my car until dawn, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked like a stranger, hollow eyes, pale skin, mouth trembling. I thought about quitting the care home, but something told me it would not matter. The man had already crossed the line into my life. Leaving the job would not make him stop. He was not tied to that building anymore. He was tied to me. That evening, before work, I tried one desperate thing. I borrowed a ladder from the maintenance closet and climbed up to the spot above my bed. The plaster was cracked and soft, crumbling under my touch. When I pressed gently, a chunk fell away, leaving a small hole. Behind it was only darkness, too deep for the shallow gap between floors should have allowed. I leaned closer, my flashlight beam swallowed by the void. Something moved inside, not a shadow, not a trick of light. Something shifted in that impossible darkness, closer than I wanted to believe. A faint scratching echoed out, followed by a whisper that froze me in place. "You cannot hide." I nearly fell off the ladder, scrambling back, the flashlight clattering to the floor. I pressed myself against the wall, shaking, staring at that hole until dawn. When it was time for work, I did not want to go, but some part of me felt like I had no choice. Like if I tried to run, it would only follow faster. As I drove in, I kept imagining what it wanted, why it lingered above me night after night without striking, and the answer I kept circling back to made me sick. It was waiting. Waiting until I was too tired, too broken to resist. And each night, with every scream in the halls and every creak above my head at home, I felt myself breaking closer to that point. I woke up that morning on the floor of my apartment, still in my work uniform, still clutching the flashlight that had gone dead hours earlier. My whole body ached, stiff from curling against the wall all night, eyes fixed on that ragged hole above my bed. The whisper still echoed in my head like a fever dream. You cannot hide. I told myself over and over it could not be real, but the truth was already carved into the plaster and scratched into the ceilings of my life. I called in sick that evening, something I had never done before. My voice cracked as I told the supervisor I had a fever, and he sounded annoyed but agreed. I hung up before I could change my mind. I thought maybe a night away from the building would help, but the moment the sun set, the scratching began again. Louder this time, traveling from one end of the apartment to the other, as if the man was pacing above me. I knew then I would not survive another night unless I faced it. Hiding, ignoring, praying for it to leave me alone had only made it stronger. I gathered the few things I thought might help. A flashlight with new batteries, a kitchen knife, a bottle of whiskey for courage. My hands trembled so badly I spilled half of it before taking a gulp, burning my throat raw. Then I dragged the ladder into the bedroom, set it beneath the cracked plaster, and climbed. The hole gaped black and wide, unnatural in its depth. I shone the flashlight inside. Dust floated in the beam, shifting like disturbed ash. The void beyond did not look like an attic. It looked endless. My stomach lurched as I leaned closer. "Come down," I whispered, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "You want me, right? Then come down." The silence stretched long enough that I thought I had made a fool of myself. Then the scratching began, louder, sharper, closer. Two pale hands appeared at the edge of the hole, curling against the plaster, nails gouging trails through the wall. Slowly, impossibly, the man pulled himself down. First the head, tilting unnaturally, black eyes gleaming in the flashlight beam. Then the long, thin arms, joints bending wrong as they folded into the room. His body slid through as if gravity meant nothing, limbs stretching and contorting until he hung there suspended halfway between ceiling and floor. I wanted to run, to scream, but instead I raised the knife. My hand shook violently, but I kept it aimed. He tilted his head, mouth stretching into that grotesque smile, teeth gray and sharp. He whispered again, the voice like dry leaves crumbling. "You watched me too long." He dropped suddenly, hitting the floor with a thud that rattled the frame of the ladder. He rose in one smooth motion, taller than any man I had ever seen, limbs dragging against the floor as if unused to standing upright. His eyes never left mine. I swung the knife wildly. It sliced through the air, catching only dust. He moved with unnatural speed, twisting out of reach, circling me like a predator testing prey. I backed against the wall, heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. Then something inside me snapped. Weeks of fear, of sleepless nights, of scratches above my bed, boiled over. I lunged, driving the knife forward with every ounce of strength left in me. The blade met resistance, plunging deep into his chest. For one impossible second I thought it would not matter, that he would only smile wider. But the smile faltered. His body convulsed, jerking violently. The black eyes widened, flickering like dying embers. A sound ripped from his throat, not a whisper this time, but a roar that shook the walls, rattled the windows, made the plaster rain down in choking clouds. He staggered backward, collapsing to the floor, limbs spasming as if pulled by invisible strings. I ripped the knife free and stabbed again and again until my arms gave out. Dust and plaster coated me, my throat raw from screaming. When I finally looked down, there was nothing on the floor but fragments of ceiling tile and a dark smear that vanished as I watched, seeping into the cracks of the wood. The room was silent, too silent. I sank to my knees, shaking so hard I thought my bones might splinter. I stayed there until dawn, knife clutched in bloodless fingers, flashlight beam flickering over the ruined plaster. The apartment felt empty for the first time in weeks. No scratching, no groaning, no face pressed against the ceiling, just silence. When the sun rose, I dragged the mattress back into the bedroom and collapsed. I slept dreamlessly for the first time in months. At work the next evening, I braced myself for the screams. But midnight came, and the halls stayed quiet. The monitors showed nothing unusual, only the ordinary emptiness of dim corridors. The residents slept soundly, no shouts, no pounding on doors. For the first time, the building felt like what it was supposed to be, just a care home. The other staff noticed too. One of the nurses even remarked that it was the calmest night she had seen in months. I forced a smile and nodded, but inside I felt hollow, like I had left something of myself in that apartment. Over the next week, the claw marks on my ceiling seemed to fade, as though they had never been there. The dust stopped falling. I slept without fear. Yet sometimes, when the house is quiet and I find myself staring at the blank ceiling, I remember the weight of that knife sinking into something that should not have been real. I do not know what the man was, spirit, demon, hallucination, maybe something older, something that had nothing to do with me until I looked too closely. But I do know this: he is gone. The care home is quiet, my apartment is silent, and I am still here. That should feel like victory, but it does not. It feels like surviving a fire only to realize the smoke has settled into your lungs forever. Last night I woke suddenly, certain I had heard something. I lay there in the dark, heart racing, ears straining. The ceiling was still, unbroken, blank. Nothing moved, nothing whispered. But I swear, just before I drifted back to sleep, I felt the faintest shift of weight on the mattress, like someone had brushed against the edge before moving away. Maybe it was only a dream. Maybe it was the ghost of memory. Or maybe, even in death, some things never really let go. I live in a small brick house on a quiet street in Toronto, the kind of place where the evenings are filled with the gentle murmur of neighbors heading home and the distant glow of porch lights flickering on. For years it felt safe, familiar, but something has changed, and now I find myself waiting every night for the moment when the knocking begins. It started about a month ago. I remember waking up in the darkness, the room cold and still, the ticking of the old clock on the wall the only sound. Then I heard it. A soft, deliberate knock on the back door, 3 times, steady and measured, as if someone was standing there, counting out the seconds between each tap. I lay there in bed, my heart thudding in the silence. I told myself it was just the wind or maybe the old wood settling in the night, but I knew the sound of a knock. I had heard it 1,000 times, and there was no mistaking it for anything else. I got up and padded down the narrow hallway, the floorboards creaking under my feet. The kitchen was dark, the soft glow of the street lamp outside spilling in through the window over the sink. I stood there for a moment, my hand resting on the doorknob, listening. Nothing, just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint rustle of leaves outside. I took a deep breath and turned the lock, pulling the door open just a crack. The alley behind the house was empty, the shadows long and still. I stood there, peering out into the darkness, half expecting to see someone standing there, but there was nothing. Just the quiet of the night and the soft breath of the cold air against my face. I closed the door and went back to bed, telling myself it was just my imagination, but I could not shake the feeling that something had been there, standing just beyond the reach of the light. The next night, it happened again. 3 soft knocks, always at the same time, 3 in the morning. I woke up the moment I heard it, my eyes snapping open in the darkness. This time I did not hesitate. I got up and went to the door, the cold floor biting at my bare feet. Again, nothing, no movement, no sign of anyone at all. But as I stood there, peering out into the shadows, I saw something. a shape. Tall and thin, just at the edge of the light cast by the alley lamp. It was there for a moment, a flicker of movement, and then it was gone. My breath caught in my throat, and I slammed the door shut, turning the lock with hands that would not stop shaking. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of the light, a branch moving in the wind. But I knew it was not. I had seen it, a shadow that moved like a man, standing there in the cold watching me. The nights since have all been the same. 3 a.m, 3 soft knocks, sometimes at the back door, sometimes at the window over the sink. I stopped sleeping in my bed, choosing instead to sit in the living room with the lights on, a blanket wrapped around my shoulders like a shield. But even in the soft glow of the lamps I could feel it. The weight of that shadow waiting for me, patient and silent. I tried to tell someone once. My brother came by for dinner a few nights after it started. He laughed it off, said it was probably some local kid playing a prank. But the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching told me he did not really believe that. He saw the dark circles under my eyes, the way I flinched at every small sound. The truth is, I do not know what to believe. I have never been one to scare easy, but this is different. It feels like something older, something that does not care if I believe or not. It is there, every night, knocking at the same hour like a question that does not need an answer. I have tried everything to make it stop. I put up new locks, added extra bolts to the doors. I even bought a small security camera and set it up in the kitchen window, the red light a small comfort in the darkness. But the camera never catches anything. No movement, no shape. Just the empty alley, the quiet street. It is like he only exists when I am the one watching. Sometimes I wonder if it is all in my head, if the long nights and the soft press of the dark have finally gotten to me. But then I hear it again, that steady knock, and I know it is real. It is too deliberate, too patient to be a dream. Last night it was worse. The knocking started at the back door, but then it moved, slowly, steadily, like he was walking around the house. 3 knocks at the window in the kitchen, then at the window in the hallway. I sat there on the couch, my hands clenched in the blanket, listening as he moved closer and closer, the rhythm of it unchanging, like a heartbeat in the silence. I did not open the door. I did not look outside. I just sat there, my eyes fixed on the wall, my breath coming in short, shaky bursts. When the knocking finally stopped, the quiet was almost worse. I waited for hours, listening for any sign that he was still there, but there was nothing. Just the soft tick of the clock and the distant sound of a car passing by on the street. Now I sit here with the lights on and the blanket still wrapped tight around me. It is almost 3 a.m. again, and I know he will come. I can feel it, the slow crawl of something moving in the dark, the soft echo of footsteps that are not really there. I do not know what he wants. I do not know if he is a man, or a shadow, or something else entirely. But I know that he will keep coming night after night, until I find the courage to open the door and face whatever waits in the darkness. And tonight, I think I just might. The night after I decided I might open the door was the longest one yet. I sat in the living room with all the lights on, the soft hum of the fridge in the kitchen the only sound. The clock on the wall ticked away the seconds like it was counting down to something I was not sure I wanted to see. I wrapped myself tighter in the blanket, the weight of it grounding me in the stillness. My hands were cold, and every few minutes I would stand up and check the locks on the doors and windows, just to be sure. I kept telling myself that if it was just some man playing tricks, I would see him clearly when I opened the door. Maybe he would be gone when he saw me face to face, the spell of his knocking broken by the bright light of my kitchen. But in the back of my mind, I knew that was not really what I believed. There was something about the way he came every night, always at 3 in the morning, that felt too precise, too measured to be some random prowler. When the clock finally clicked over to 3, I held my breath. The first knock came, soft and deliberate, just like always. 3 quick raps, as steady as the tick of the second hand. My heart jumped in my chest, and I felt my fingers tighten around the edge of the blanket. The next knock was at the window by the sink, the sound sharp against the glass. I could not see him from where I sat, but I could feel him there, just beyond the thin pane that separated us. I stood up slowly, my feet cold on the wooden floor. Each step felt heavy, like I was walking underwater. I paused in the doorway to the kitchen, listening to the silence that fell after the knocking stopped. My breath was loud in the quiet, each inhale a sharp reminder that I was still here, still alive. I stepped into the kitchen and walked to the window. The alley was empty, the light from the street lamp casting long shadows that stretched across the cracked pavement. But in the reflection of the glass, I thought I saw something move, a flicker of darkness, gone as quickly as it had come. I reached for the door, my fingers brushing the cold metal of the lock. For a moment, I thought I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in the hollow of my chest. I turned the lock slowly, the click of it too loud in the silence. Then I took a deep breath and pulled the door open. The air outside was cold and smelled faintly of damp earth and old stone. The alley was as empty as it had been every night before, the shadows long and still. But I could feel him there, somewhere just beyond the reach of the light, watching. I stepped back and closed the door, turning the lock with hands that would not stop shaking. I stood there for a long time, my back pressed against the cool wood, listening to the quiet. There was no more knocking that night, no more sounds to chase me back to the safety of the couch. Just the slow, steady beat of my heart and the faint creak of the old house settling into the cold. The next morning, I woke up to a bright sun streaming in through the living room windows. The light felt like a small mercy, warm and gentle against my face. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the taste of it bitter and sharp on my tongue. The world outside looked so normal in the daylight. Children walking to school, the soft rumble of the garbage truck down the street. But I could not shake the memory of that knock, the echo of it still living in my bones. I spent the afternoon trying to keep busy. I cleaned the flat, scrubbing every surface until my hands were raw. I opened the windows to let in the fresh air, the cool breeze stirring the curtains and making the shadows dance on the walls. I told myself that if I could make the space feel new again, maybe I could leave the fear behind with the dust and the dirt. But as the sun began to set and the shadows grew longer, the weight of the night began to settle over me again. I made dinner but barely tasted it, my mind drifting back to that quiet alley and the shape I had seen in the reflection of the window. I washed the dishes slowly, the warm water and the soft clink of the plates a small comfort in the gathering dark. I tried to tell myself that I would not sit up that night, that I would go to bed and let the knocking come and go without me. But as the hours crept closer to 3, I found myself back in the living room, the blanket wrapped around my shoulders, the lights burning bright and soft. The clock ticked away the seconds, each one a small pulse in the silence. When the first knock came, I did not move. I just sat there, my breath caught in my throat, listening to the steady rhythm of it. 3 knocks, then silence. 3 knocks at the window, then silence again. It felt like a ritual, a quiet conversation that I was only just beginning to understand. I wanted to stand up and throw open the door, to face whatever waited there and be done with it. But I stayed in my seat, the fear holding me like a hand around my wrist. I thought about the stories my grandmother used to tell me when I was a child, about the shadow man who came for those who listened too long to the whispers in the dark. When the knocking finally stopped, I let out a breath I had not realized I had been holding. The silence that followed was almost worse than the sound. It was so complete, so final, that it felt like the world had stopped moving altogether. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the quiet, the soft glow of the lamps the only light in the room, and waited for the dawn. When the sun finally rose, I felt a strange kind of calm settle over me, like I had made it through something I did not have a name for. But deep down, I knew that the shadow man would be back, and I knew that I was still not ready to see what waited in the dark. The next few days felt like I was moving through a fog. Everything looked the same in the daylight, the same shops and quiet streets, the same neighbor waving as she carried groceries inside. But it felt like the world had lost some of its warmth, like there was a thin layer of frost on every word and every smile. I went to work and I talked to people, but my mind was always somewhere else, always waiting for 3 in the morning to come around again. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that it was just some stranger passing through, some strange man who had found a rhythm in the night and decided to keep knocking until he grew bored and moved on. But the part of me that still lay awake long after midnight knew better. It was in the way the knocking was always the same, always 3 in the morning, never early and never late. It was in the way the shadow moved outside the window, patient and silent, like it was waiting for me to look just a little too long. I started to see him even when the sun was high and the street was full of people. I would be walking home from the store and I would catch a glimpse of a tall, thin shape in the corner of my eye. Or I would be doing dishes at the kitchen sink and see that flicker of movement in the reflection of the glass. It never stayed long enough to be sure, never close enough to call out to. But it was always there, just at the edge of the light. One evening, I decided I needed to do something. I was tired of feeling like a ghost in my own house, tired of waiting for the knocking to come. I went to the hardware store and bought a motion light, the kind that flicks on bright as day if anything moves outside. I put it up over the back door, my hands shaking a little as I screwed it into place. When I was done, I stood there for a long time, staring out into the alley. The light was off, the shadows deep and still, but I felt a little stronger knowing that if he came again, at least I would see him clearly. That night, I sat in the living room with the blanket around my shoulders, the clock ticking away the minutes in the quiet. I watched the window, my eyes heavy and dry, and waited. When the hands on the clock moved past 3, I held my breath. The first knock came, soft and steady. I felt my heart start to race, the sound as clear as a voice in the dark. 3 soft knocks, then silence. I sat there, my hands clenched tight in the blanket, listening for the sound of the motion light flicking on. But it stayed dark, the alley outside as still as it had always been. The second knock came at the window by the sink, the sound sharp against the glass. I turned my head slowly, my breath catching in my throat. I could see the faint reflection of the light in the alley, still off, the shadows deep and undisturbed, but I knew he was there. I could feel it, the cold weight of his presence pressing in from the other side of the glass. I wanted to stand up, to go to the door and throw it open, and end it all, but I stayed where I was, my body locked in place by a fear that felt older than the house itself. The knocking stopped, the quiet that followed almost gentle. I let out a slow breath, my hands trembling. When dawn came, I went outside and looked at the motion light. It was working fine, the small red light steady and sure. I tested it myself, walking back and forth until it flicked on, bright and blinding in the gray morning, but it had not caught him. Whatever he was, he moved in a way that did not trigger the light, in a way that did not belong to the world I knew. I spent the rest of the day in a kind of daze. My mind kept going back to that moment, the way the knocking had sounded so close, so sure. I thought about calling someone, about asking if they had seen anything strange, but every time I picked up the phone, the words felt too heavy to say out loud. That evening I walked down the alley, the light from the street lamp spilling in pale circles on the cracked pavement. The bricks of the houses on either side felt close and cold, the air heavy with the smell of damp earth and old stone. I stood there for a long time listening to the soft rustle of leaves in the wind, the distant sound of traffic on the main road. I did not see him that night, but I felt him, like a weight in the shadows, a breath on the back of my neck that never quite touched my skin. I went back inside and locked the door, the sound of the bolt sliding home a small comfort. I made tea and sat at the kitchen table, the warmth of the cup in my hands grounding me in the quiet. I told myself again that it would stop, that maybe this was the last night I would have to hear that soft, patient knock. But deep down I knew it would not end, not until I was ready to face him, not until I was ready to open the door and see what waited on the other side. That night I did not sleep at all. I sat in the living room with the lights off, the darkness pressing in close and quiet. I watched the clock, the slow creep of the hands across the face, and waited for 3 a.m. to come again. The next night felt different. I could not say why exactly, but there was a heaviness in the air that settled over everything like a thick fog. I spent the day trying to keep busy, cleaning every corner of the house, rearranging shelves, scrubbing the floors until my hands were raw. But nothing I did could shake that quiet tension that had settled over me. It was like the hours themselves were holding their breath, waiting for 3 a.m. to come again. When the sun began to set, I made dinner, though I had no appetite. I forced down a few bites and then set the plate in the sink, the scrape of the fork on the porcelain loud in the stillness. The house felt too quiet, each creak of the floorboards like a whisper just out of reach. I turned on the radio for a while, the soft murmur of voices filling the room with something like comfort. But even that felt hollow, the words drifting past me like smoke. As midnight came and went, I found myself sitting on the edge of the couch, the blanket wrapped tight around my shoulders, my eyes fixed on the small clock on the mantel. Each tick of the second hand was a slow echo in the room, a small marker of the time slipping by. I kept telling myself, that this would be the night I would not give in to the fear, that this would be the night I would stand up and see him for what he was. But as the minutes crawled by, the fear only grew. It was not the loud, sudden fear that makes your breath catch and your heart race. It was something deeper, something that lived in the hollow of my chest and spread cold fingers through every breath. It was the fear that comes when you know something is waiting for you, and you have no choice but to meet it. At 3 a.m, the first knock came, soft and steady, just like every night before. 3 gentle raps against the back door, so quiet they might have been nothing but the memory of a sound. My hands tightened around the edge of the blanket. The fabric pulled taut between my fingers. I did not move. I just sat there, listening. The second knock came at the window, the sound sharper now, a quiet insistence that pulled at something deep inside me. I felt my breath catch in my throat, my heart beating a slow, heavy rhythm in the silence. I could almost feel the weight of his presence outside, the shape of him waiting just beyond the glass. I stood up slowly, the blanket slipping from my shoulders to pool at my feet. My legs felt heavy, each step a deliberate choice as I walked to the kitchen. The light above the sink was still on, casting a soft glow across the empty countertops. I stood there for a moment, my hand resting on the cool edge of the sink, and looked out into the darkness. The alley was as empty as it had always been, the motion light still and silent above the door. But in the faint reflection of the glass, I saw him. A tall, thin shape, darker than the shadows around it, standing perfectly still. My breath fogged the window in a soft cloud, and for a moment, it almost looked like he was breathing with me, our breaths mingling in the cold night air. I reached for the lock, my hand trembling. Part of me wanted to turn away, to walk back to the couch and pull the blanket tight around me, and pretend it was all just a dream. But another part of me, a quiet voice that had been growing louder with each passing night, told me that I could not hide anymore, that I had to see him, to know him. I turned the lock slowly, the soft click loud in the silence. I took a deep breath and pulled the door open, just a crack at first, the cold air rushing in to wrap around my ankles. The alley was empty. The light above the door stayed dark, the shadows deep and undisturbed, but I could feel him there, standing just beyond the reach of the light, the weight of his gaze pressing in around me. I stepped back and opened the door wider, the old hinges groaning softly. The cold night air swept in, and I stood there for a long moment, staring out into the darkness. I did not see him, but I knew he was there. I could feel it in the way the shadows seemed to breathe, in the way the air itself felt alive. I waited. The cold seeped into my bones, but I did not move. I wanted to hear his voice, to see the shape of his face, to know if there was anything human in the dark, but the silence held. No movement, no sound, just the quiet breath of the night and the soft beat of my heart in the hollow of my chest. After what felt like forever, I closed the door and turned the lock again. I stood there with my hand still on the knob, the chill of the metal grounding me in the moment. I was shaking, but it was not from the cold. It was from the knowing, the quiet certainty that he would come again, that this was not the end of it. I went back to the couch and pulled the blanket around me, the soft weight of it a small comfort in the quiet. I sat there until the first light of dawn crept in through the windows, the soft blue of the morning sky washing away the last of the night, and in that light I felt something like peace. not because I thought it was over, but because I had finally faced the thing that had been waiting for me in the dark. I knew he would come again, and I knew that when he did, I would be ready. The days after I finally opened the door were some of the strangest I have ever lived through. It was like I had stepped out of one world and into another, one where the air itself seemed to hum with something I could not name. I found myself looking at everything a little closer, listening for the small sounds in the quiet spaces of the day. Even in the bright light of morning, I could feel the memory of that cold night clinging to me, the quiet weight of the dark pressing against my skin. I kept telling myself it was over, that opening the door had been enough, that the shadow man had seen me standing there and would leave me alone now. But in my heart, I knew that was not true. There was something in the way he had waited, something in the patience of those 3 soft knocks that told me he was not finished yet. At work, I was distracted, my mind always drifting back to that moment in the alley, the feel of the cold air on my face, the quiet press of the dark against my skin. My coworkers noticed. They asked if I was all right, if I was sleeping enough. I lied, said I was just a little tired, just a little worn out from too many late nights. But I could see the worry in their eyes, the way they watched me when they thought I was not paying attention. At night, I tried to sleep, but it always felt like there was something just outside the edge of my dreams, some soft voice calling to me from the dark. I would wake up gasping, my heart pounding, the room around me too still, too quiet, and always, I would find myself listening for that soft knock at the door. One night, I decided I could not wait anymore. I needed to know. I needed to understand what he wanted from me, why he kept coming back. I sat in the kitchen, the light above the sink casting a warm glow over the worn wooden table. I made a pot of tea, the steam curling in the cool air, and I waited. The clock on the wall ticked away the minutes, the soft rhythm of it almost soothing. I thought about all the nights I had spent waiting, the way the fear had become a part of the air I breathed. But tonight felt different. Tonight, I felt something close to calm. At 3 a.m, the first knock came. I closed my eyes and let the sound wash over me, soft and deliberate, 3 measured beats against the wood. I took a deep breath and stood up, my feet cold on the floor, my hands steady for the first time in weeks. I walked to the door and placed my hand on the lock, the metal cool and smooth under my fingers. I did not open it. Instead, I spoke. My voice was quiet, but it felt strong in the silence. "I know you are there," I said. "I see you. I hear you. What do you want from me?" There was no answer, just the soft hush of the wind outside and the quiet tick of the clock on the wall. I waited, my breath slow and steady, my heart a soft thrum in the quiet. Then for the first time the knocking came again, faster this time, a quiet urgency that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. I opened the door. The alley was empty, the light from the street lamp soft and pale against the wet pavement. The air was cold and smelled of rain and old stone. I stepped out onto the small stoop, the chill biting at my bare feet, and I looked into the dark. At first I saw nothing, just the quiet hush of the night, the soft rustle of the wind through the narrow space between the buildings. But then, at the very edge of the light, I saw him. He was standing there, tall and thin, his shape just a shadow against the darkness. He did not move, did not speak. but I could feel his gaze, heavy and patient, like he had been waiting for me to see him all along. For a long moment, we just stood there, the quiet stretching out between us like a held breath. I wanted to ask him again, to demand to know why he had chosen me, what he was looking for. But the words would not come. I realized then that maybe it was not about answers. Maybe it was about seeing him, really seeing him, and letting him see me in return. I took a step forward, the cold of the stone sharp under my feet. The shadow man did not move, but the air around him seemed to shimmer, like the darkness itself was alive, breathing in the night. I felt a shiver run down my spine, but I did not turn away. I stood there until the first light of dawn began to creep over the rooftops, the pale glow washing the shadows away inch by inch. As the light grew, the shape of him began to fade, the edges of the darkness softening until there was nothing left but the quiet of the alley and the soft sigh of the wind. I went back inside and closed the door, the lock sliding home with a quiet finality that felt like a promise. I stood there for a long moment, my hand still resting on the wood, and I realized I was not afraid anymore. I did not know what he was or why he had come to me, but I knew that I had faced him, that I had stood in the cold and the dark and met his gaze without flinching. When the sun rose fully and the light of day filled the kitchen, I sat down at the table and made another cup of tea. I watched the steam curl up into the quiet morning air, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. I knew he would come again. I could feel it in the quiet spaces of the day, in the soft hush of the wind at night. But I was not afraid. Because now, when I heard that soft knock at 3 a.m, I would know it for what it was. A reminder that some shadows are meant to be seen. In the days that followed, I felt a quiet kind of calm settle over me. The fear that had once pressed down on my chest like a weight had shifted, easing into something more like acceptance. I still heard the knocking at 3 a.m, still felt the presence of the shadow man outside my door, but it no longer held the same power over me. I had seen him. I had looked into the darkness and found that I was still standing when the sun rose. I went about my days like I always had, but there was a new lightness in my step, a small smile that I carried with me even in the quiet hours. My co-workers noticed. They asked if I was sleeping better, if I was feeling more like myself. I told them yes, and it was the truth, at least in the way that mattered most. At night, I no longer sat in the living room with the lights on, waiting for the knocking to start. Instead, I let the house rest in the darkness, the soft sigh of the old wood settling around me like a gentle hand. I would lie in bed and listen to the wind outside, the soft rustle of the leaves and the distant hum of the city. And when the knocking came, as it always did, I would let it wash over me like a song I had learned to hum along with. Sometimes I would get up and stand at the window, my bare feet cool against the worn floorboards. I would look out into the alley, the light from the street lamp painting long shadows across the pavement. Most nights it was empty, just the quiet hush of the city sleeping. But sometimes I would see him, just a shape at the edge of the light, tall and still, watching. I never tried to open the door again. I did not need to. I had already seen him, already stood in the cold air and met his gaze. I understood now that it was not about answers or explanations. It was about presence, about the way some things slip between the cracks of the world and leave their mark on those who are willing to see. I started to write about it in a small notebook, the pages filling with slow, careful words. Not just the story of the Shadow Man, but the way it had changed me, the way it had taught me to look at the quiet spaces of the night with something like respect. I wrote about the fear, yes, but also about the calm that had come after, the way the darkness could hold both terror and comfort in the same breath. One evening, as the last light of the day faded, and the first cool breath of night settled over the city, I took a walk. I wandered through the narrow streets, the soft glow of the lamps painting the old brick in warm gold. The world felt softer somehow, the shadows less sharp, the quiet more like a song than a threat. I stopped by a small park, the trees tall and black against the pale sky. I sat on a bench and closed my eyes, letting the night settle around me. I thought about that first night, the way the knocking had felt like a question I did not have the words to answer. And I thought about how far I had come, how the fear had given way to something deeper, something that felt almost like understanding. When I got home, I made tea and sat by the window, the warm cup cradled in my hands. The alley was empty, the soft glow of the street lamp steady and sure. But I could feel him there, even if I could not see him, a quiet presence in the night, a reminder that some things are not meant to be understood, only witnessed. At 3 a.m, the knocking came. 3 soft raps, steady and deliberate, like a heartbeat in the quiet. I did not flinch. I did not hide. I just sat there and listened, my breath slow and even, the warmth of the tea grounding me in the dark. I knew then that this was how it would be. The Shadow Man would keep knocking and I would keep listening. It was not a curse or a gift. It was just a part of the night, a part of me that I had learned to carry without fear. As the first light of dawn crept over the rooftops, I felt a soft peace settle in my chest. The knocking had stopped, the quiet of the early morning wrapping around me like a promise. I stood up and opened the curtains, the pale light of the sun washing the world clean and bright. I looked out at the alley one last time, the stones wet with dew, the air cool and sweet, and I smiled, a small, quiet smile that felt like the truest thing I had ever known. Because I understood now that some shadows are not meant to be chased away. Some shadows are just part of the night, as much as the moon and the wind and the soft, patient beat of your own heart. I turned away from the window and walked into the kitchen, the day waiting for me like an old friend. I made another cup of tea and sat at the table, the soft clink of the spoon against the cup, a small, steady comfort. Outside, the city woke slowly, the sound of footsteps and laughter drifting in through the open window. I let the warmth of the tea fill me, the soft hush of the morning, a gentle song in the back of my mind. And in that quiet moment, I knew that I was all right. The Shadow Man would come again, as he always did, but he did not own the night. The night was mine too, filled with light and breath, and the small, sweet comforts that make a life. I took a deep breath and let it out slow, the steam of the tea curling up into the soft light of the kitchen. The world was still and quiet and full of promise, and I was ready to meet it, one slow, patient moment at a time. I used to laugh at people who believed in ghosts. My mom would tell me she felt cold spots in her old house, or that she heard whispers at night, and I would roll my eyes and tell her she was scaring herself. I grew up the kind of person who liked horror movies but never flinched at them. Paranormal stuff was entertainment to me, nothing more. Old houses creaked. Graveyards were just dirt and stone. The dark was only an absence of light. That was all. That changed last fall. A friend of mine, his name was Eric, got obsessed with ghost hunting. He bought all the toys, EMF meters, cheap voice recorders, an infrared thermometer he barely knew how to use. He begged me to tag along one Friday night to some abandoned farmhouse outside Flagstaff. Locals said it was haunted, and of course the internet had a dozen bullshit stories about murders and cursed land and strange sightings. I rolled my eyes but agreed, mostly because he offered to buy me beer afterward. The farmhouse was nothing special. Caved-in roof on one side, boards nailed haphazardly across the windows, graffiti covering the walls. It smelled like piss and mold. I remember thinking it was less creepy and more depressing, a place teenagers came to spray paint dicks on the walls and scare each other with ghost stories. Eric was buzzing with excitement. He waved the EMF reader around like it meant something, set up his little recorder on a broken chair, and whispered into the dark, asking any spirits present to give us a sign. I tried not to laugh. I just leaned against the wall, arms crossed, waiting for the night to end. We stayed for hours. Nothing happened. Not a single bump or whisper or flicker of light. Just dust motes and cold air blowing through cracks in the wood. Around midnight, I told him I was done. We packed up and left, and I remember teasing him about wasting a whole evening chasing shadows. He looked disappointed, but he still grinned and said, "Just wait. Sometimes the weird stuff shows up after." At the time, I thought he was full of shit. It was not until the next day that I started to rethink it. Eric had gone home with the recorder and called me the next afternoon, saying I had to hear something. I drove over, expecting him to show me some random static he thought was a ghost voice, but when he hit play, I swear to God my blood went cold. It was my voice, faint and distant, asking, "Is anyone here?" And then, right after, a low, rasping whisper replied, "You took me home." I laughed at first, told him it was interference or some sick joke. He swore up and down that he had not touched the file. I played it back a dozen times, waiting for it to sound fake, but every time that whisper sent a shiver through me, I tried to shake it off. I told myself it was bad audio, maybe even some creep hiding in the house we had not noticed, but deep down, something about it felt wrong. When I left his place, I tried not to think about it. But the next week, little things began happening in my apartment. I live alone, just me and my cat, so I notice when things are out of place. My cat, who usually slept at the foot of my bed, started refusing to even go in the bedroom. He would sit at the doorway, tail puffed up, growling low at something I could not see. At first I thought maybe he was spooked by mice or some other animal, but then doors I knew I had shut were left open. The bathroom light would be on in the middle of the night. And every morning, without fail, my blankets were half pulled down, bunched at the foot of the bed. I told myself I was doing it in my sleep, but it did not feel like that. It felt deliberate. Then came the scratching. The first time I heard it, I was almost asleep. A faint noise, soft and irregular, coming from beneath the mattress. I told myself it was just the cat, but when I called for him, I saw him perched on the dresser, staring at the bed with wide eyes. The scratching grew louder, more frantic, like fingernails clawing against wood. I froze, staring at the ceiling, every muscle locked. My heart thudded in my ears. After what felt like an eternity, the noise stopped. I lay there until morning, refusing to move, too terrified to look. The next night, it happened again. This time, I grabbed my phone and leaned over the edge of the bed, shining the flashlight underneath. And that was the first time I saw it. Two pale hands gripping the floorboards, long, thin arms stretching out, joints bent at impossible angles, skin stretched tight like wax paper. I remember the way my stomach dropped, how I nearly dropped the phone. Then its head emerged. Slowly, unnervingly slow, it turned toward me. The eyes were black and reflective, like an animal's at night. And then it smiled, teeth jagged and gray, too many for its mouth. I scrambled for the light switch, slammed it on. When I looked back, the space under the bed was empty. Just dust and darkness. I did not sleep at all that night. Every shadow felt like it was about to crawl out and grab me. The next day at work, I was a wreck. I told Eric about it, half joking, half desperate for him to tell me I was imagining things. He looked at me seriously, then said, "Maybe it followed you." "Who? Fuck you," I snapped. But deep down, I believed him. That was the start of it. From then on, I heard the breathing, heavy, guttural breathing, inches from the floorboards. Sometimes I saw fingers curling around the edge of the bed frame. Other times, nothing at all, just the feeling that I was being watched, that if I let my guard down for even a second, it would crawl all the way out. I am not afraid of graveyards anymore. I am not afraid of the dark, but I am afraid of my own bed, because every time I close my eyes, I hear it whispering again in that rasping voice. You took me home. The first few days after I saw it were a blur. I kept telling myself that it had to be sleep deprivation or maybe even some fucked up dream bleeding into reality. I tried to explain it away as stress, or that maybe I had been half awake and imagined the whole thing. But every time I looked at my bed, I felt that same prickling dread crawl up my spine. My cat still refused to enter the room, and that told me all I needed to know. Animals know when something is wrong. I started sleeping on the couch, but that did not help much. The apartment is small, and the bedroom is right down the hall. I could still hear the sounds. The soft dragging, like fingers on wood, and then sometimes a low groan, almost like breathing. One night I woke up around 3 in the morning and realized I was hearing the same scratching again. It was faint, muffled by the closed door, but it was still there. And the fucked up part was that it was not coming from under the bed this time. It sounded like it was inside the walls. I pressed my ear against the drywall and felt my stomach twist. There it was, that slow scrape of nails against the inside of the wall, traveling from one end to the other, like something crawling around inside. I pulled away and sat there with my back against the couch, trying not to cry. The sound finally faded around dawn, but I did not sleep at all after that. Work became impossible. I would show up looking like hell, shaking from too much coffee and too little sleep. People started asking questions. One co-worker joked that I looked like I was on drugs. I snapped at him and stormed out. I could not explain it. How do you tell someone that something crawled out from under your bed and now it follows you around your apartment? They would lock me up. Eric was the only person I trusted with it, but even he looked uneasy when I told him. He kept repeating that he had not heard the whisper on his recording, only silence, which made me even more paranoid. Whatever this thing was, it had chosen me. Out of everyone in that shitty old farmhouse, it picked me to latch onto. The second week after it started, I woke to find my blankets pulled completely off the bed and lying neatly folded in the middle of the floor. That shook me more than the scratching ever had. Folding is deliberate. Folding means thought. I stood there staring at the pile for 10 minutes before grabbing the blankets and throwing them into the closet. I could not bring myself to touch them again. I slept under an old hoodie that night, shivering, afraid of even my own sheets. Then came the night I actually saw it again. I was lying on the couch with every light in the apartment blazing. I told myself that if it showed up, I would at least see it coming this time. At some point my eyes drooped, and I must have dozed off. I woke suddenly to the sound of breathing. Not faint this time, not muffled. It was deep and heavy, like someone standing right over me. I opened my eyes just enough to see. It was crouched at the end of the couch, long arms folded like a praying mantis, black eyes locked on me. Its head tilted slowly, as if studying me, and then it smiled again, that horrible gray grin. I bolted upright, heart slamming, and it vanished, just gone. The space where it had been was empty. I checked every corner of the apartment, every closet, under every piece of furniture. Nothing, but I could still feel it, that weight of being watched, pressing in on me no matter where I stood. I did not go to work the next day. I called in sick and stayed home with the curtains drawn. My phone buzzed a few times, but I ignored it. I just sat at the table, staring at the bedroom door, waiting for the next sound. Around noon, I heard a faint thump from inside the room. I thought about opening the door, then thought better of it. I was not going to give that thing the satisfaction. The thumps continued every few hours, sometimes soft, sometimes loud enough to rattle the picture frames on the wall. I tried drowning it out with music, but even then I could feel the vibrations through the floor. My cat hid under the kitchen cabinets, refusing to come out. I envied him. By the third week, it stopped being only at night. I would catch glimpses during the day, too. A pale hand curling around the bathroom door frame, a shadow stretched too long across the hallway floor. Once, while brushing my teeth, I looked into the mirror and swore I saw it standing behind me, not in the reflection in the room. I spun around, toothpaste foaming at my mouth, and of course there was nothing there. I started talking to it without realizing, muttering under my breath, telling it to fuck off, to leave me alone, sometimes begging, sometimes making threats I knew I could not carry out. I thought maybe if it heard me, it would know I was not afraid. But that was a lie. I was terrified every second. Then came the whisper. I had just laid down on the couch again, eyes wide, waiting for the scratching to start. Instead, I felt warm breath against my ear, close, impossibly close. And that same rasping voice I had heard on the recorder spoke, clear as day. "You brought me here." I jumped up, swinging blindly at the air, shouting until my throat went raw. The neighbors pounded on the wall, yelling at me to shut up, but I could not stop. I screamed until I collapsed on the floor, shaking, tears streaming down my face. When I finally calmed down, I realized my phone was buzzing again. Eric had texted me, just one line. "Do you hear it too?" I stared at the words, heart hammering. He had never admitted to hearing the voice before. He told me his recorder picked up nothing, but now he was asking if I heard it too, which meant he heard it as well. I typed back, "What the fuck are you talking about?" He replied almost instantly, "Last night, I heard it whisper." But it did not say the same thing. I asked what it had said. His answer made my skin crawl. It said, "He is mine now." I did not answer Eric right away. I just stared at his message, my hands trembling so badly that I almost dropped the phone. He had insisted from the start that he never heard the whisper on his recorder, that it was only me. Now, weeks later, he suddenly admitted that it had spoken to him too. And not just spoken, but claimed me. I wanted to call him, to demand answers, but I could not make myself hit dial. My throat was tight, my chest heavy, like saying the words out loud would make them real. Instead, I paced the apartment, muttering to myself, trying to piece it all together. It was with me, I knew that much. But why had it started talking to Eric? And why would it tell him I belonged to it? That night I did not even pretend to sleep. I left every light on and sat in the kitchen with a knife on the table, drinking coffee until my stomach hurt. The apartment was too quiet, too still. I found myself almost begging for the scratching to come back, because silence meant it could be anywhere. Around 3 a.m, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Eric. "It is standing at the foot of my bed." I froze. My eyes locked on the screen, reading the words over and over. I typed back without thinking, "Do not move. Do not look at it." His reply came instantly. "It is smiling." My heart slammed against my ribs. I typed again, fingers shaking. "Eric, get out of there." No response. I tried calling, straight to voicemail. I called again. Nothing. I sat there for nearly an hour, staring at my phone, willing it to light up with a new message, a call, anything, but it stayed dark. Finally, just as the sky outside began to pale with early morning light, my phone buzzed. It was a photo. Eric's bedroom, dim and grainy. He was lying in bed, sheets pulled to his chest, eyes wide and terrified. And at the foot of the bed stood the thing. Tall, pale, head cocked at a sick angle, those black eyes gleaming even in the dark. Its hand rested on Eric's ankle like it was claiming him. I dropped the phone so fast it clattered across the table. My stomach lurched, and I barely made it to the sink before I vomited. When I finally picked the phone back up, the photo was gone, deleted. No record of it in my gallery, no trace in the messages. If I had not still been shaking, I might have convinced myself I imagined it. I drove to Eric's place later that day, even though every instinct told me not to. His car was in the driveway, his curtains drawn tight. I knocked until my knuckles hurt. No answer. I called his name, my voice cracking. Finally, the door opened a few inches. Eric stood there, pale and hollow-eyed, like he had not slept in weeks. "Do not come in," he said, voice hoarse. I tried to argue, but he shook his head violently. "It is in here. It will see you. Just go." Before I could say anything else, he slammed the door shut. I stood there for a long time, listening to the silence inside, before finally walking away. That night, back in my apartment, the scratching returned, louder this time, not from under the bed, not from the walls, but from inside the mattress itself. Like it had crawled into the springs and was tearing its way out. I stood in the hallway staring at the bed, knife clutched in my hand, whispering, "Fuck this, fuck this, fuck this." The mattress shuddered. Not just a sound, but movement, the whole frame rocking as if something was thrashing beneath the surface. I bolted, slamming the bedroom door shut and pressing my back against it. My cat yowled from the kitchen, claws skittering against the tile. The shaking stopped after a few minutes, but I did not open that door again until morning. When I finally did, the mattress was perfectly still, but the sheets had been pulled tight, smoothed flat, like someone had made the bed for me. On the pillow sat a scrap of paper, yellowed and brittle. 3 words written in shaky handwriting. "You are mine." I burned the paper in the sink, but the smell clung to my hands all day, acrid and sour. I stopped going to work completely. My boss left a voicemail saying if I did not show up, I was fired. I deleted it. Work did not matter anymore. Nothing mattered except surviving the nights. I tried leaving town, packed a bag, threw it in the car, and started driving without a plan. By the time I hit the highway, I felt lighter, almost relieved, like maybe it would not follow me past the city limits. That hope lasted less than an hour. At a gas station outside Winslow, I stopped for coffee. I went into the bathroom to wash my face, and when I looked up into the mirror, my stomach dropped. Behind me, in the reflection, it stood at the edge of the parking lot, pale and still, head tilted, black eyes fixed on me. I spun around, heart hammering. The lot was empty. No one there. I drove back home. That night, I dreamed of the farmhouse, the walls sagging, the floor covered in dust, Eric crouched in the corner with his recorder. Only this time, I was the one whispering, my voice rasping and low, saying, "You brought me here." I woke drenched in sweat, gasping. The clock read 3:17, the exact same time the scratching always started. Sure enough, a moment later, I heard it. Not under the bed, not in the walls, not in the mattress. This time it came from the ceiling. A dragging, scraping sound moving across the plaster above me, circling slowly. I pressed my face into my hands and whispered, "Why me? What the fuck do you want from me?" The answer came instantly, not from the ceiling, from right beside my ear, "Because you let me in." I did not move after hearing that voice. I sat there on the couch, palms pressed against my ears, rocking like a child, telling myself I had imagined it. But it had been too close, too real, the warmth of breath on my skin undeniable. I could not pretend anymore that it was just scratching in the dark or tricks of exhaustion. It was here with me, awake when I was awake, waiting when I tried to sleep. For the first time, I felt like it wanted to be acknowledged. like all the small sounds and glimpses were a prelude, and now it was speaking clearly because it knew I could not ignore it any longer. The following day, I stayed out of the apartment as long as I could. I drove around aimlessly, drank too much coffee at a 24-hour diner, walked the aisles of a Walmart until employees started giving me side glances. But eventually, exhaustion pulled me back home. I told myself I would not sleep, that I would stay awake on the couch with the television blaring, but of course that did not last. When I opened my eyes again, the room was dark. I had left the lights on. I was sure of it, but now everything was shadowed. My phone said it was 3:17, that cursed minute again. I sat up, throat dry, and saw the silhouette in the corner. It had crawled fully out this time, long limbs bent at angles that made me nauseous to watch, black eyes glinting faintly in the dim glow from the streetlight outside. It did not move toward me. It only crouched, hands splayed wide on the floor, head tilting in slow jerks like a puppet with tangled strings. My instinct was to scream, but the sound stuck in my throat. My heart thudded so hard I thought it might burst. I clutched the knife I kept beside me, but my hand shook so badly the blade rattled against the table. Then it spoke again. "You are mine." The words rasped like broken glass dragged over wood. The air itself felt heavier after it said them. I squeezed my eyes shut, whispering prayers I had not said since childhood, promising anything to anyone listening if they would make it stop. When I opened them, the corner was empty. The next morning, the knife was gone. That day I called Eric again, desperate for answers. He sounded wrecked. His voice was hoarse, and he spoke in short bursts, like he was terrified someone else might be listening. "It will not leave," he whispered. I burned sage. I called a priest. I even tried sleeping in my car. It does not matter. It follows. "Why us?" I asked. Silence stretched so long I thought he had hung up. Finally he said, "Maybe because we went there. Maybe because we listened." I thought about the farmhouse, about Eric setting that recorder on a broken chair. Had we invited it without realizing? Was it as simple as speaking to it, acknowledging it? Before I could ask more, Eric muttered, "It is here," and the line went dead. I drove by his place again that night. His curtains were drawn, lights off, but I could see him through the gap in the blinds. Standing in the middle of his living room, stiff as a statue, arms hanging limply at his sides. I called his name through the door, but he did not react. When I knocked harder, something moved behind him, a pale hand sliding along the wall, curling around his shoulder like it was guiding him. I ran. Back at my apartment, I felt more alone than ever. My cat was gone. He must have slipped out when I left the door open in my rush. I searched the complex with a flashlight, calling his name until my throat hurt, but he never came back. Part of me wondered if he had been taken the same way Eric was being taken, piece by piece, until nothing human remained. That night, I refused to lie down. I sat cross-legged on the couch with every light burning, knife replaced by a hammer I found in the closet. Around 3:17, the lights flickered and dimmed until only the weakest glow remained. The scratching started again, not beneath the bed this time, but directly under the couch where I Saturday. The sound was deafening, wood splintering, nails tearing. I jumped up just as the cushions dipped inward, as if something massive pressed against them from below. The hammer shook in my hand. I wanted to swing, to smash the cushions until nothing remained, but fear rooted me in place. Then the voice came again. "You brought me here." I screamed back, "I did not fucking bring you anywhere." My voice cracked, raw with terror. "Get the fuck out. Leave me alone." The scratching stopped. Silence fell, heavy and absolute. For a moment, I thought I had won. Then, slowly, the hammer lifted out of my hand. It hovered for a split second before clattering to the floor. My hands were empty, and I had not let go. I stumbled back, tripping over the coffee table, landing hard on my spine. The figure rose from behind the couch. taller than before, its limbs stretching impossibly long, spine bending until its head nearly brushed the ceiling. Its eyes glowed faintly now, not just reflecting light but producing it, dim and cold. It leaned forward, joints creaking, and pressed its face close to mine. I could smell it, damp and metallic, like rust mixed with rot. Its jagged teeth spread into a grin so wide I thought its face might split in half. "You are mine." I scrambled to my feet and bolted for the door, fumbling with the lock. Behind me, I heard the floor creak as it followed, slow and deliberate. By the time I wrenched the door open and spilled into the hallway, the air felt lighter, and when I dared to look back, my apartment was empty. I drove until dawn with no destination, parking finally at a rest stop an hour outside town. I slept sitting upright in the driver's seat, clutching the hammer like a lifeline. When I woke, there was something in the passenger seat. A folded piece of paper, yellowed and brittle. 3 words written in the same shaky handwriting I had burned before. "You are mine." I stared at that paper on the passenger seat for what felt like an hour. My chest ached, and I kept whispering to myself that it was just a trick, just my mind filling in the blanks, but deep down I knew it was real. The same handwriting, the same brittle paper. I had burned the last one in my sink, watched it curl and blacken into nothing, yet here it was again, as if nothing could destroy it. I picked it up carefully, half expecting it to crumble in my fingers, but it held together. I read those words over and over until they blurred, then shoved the paper into the glove box and slammed it shut. I told myself I would throw it out the next time I stopped, but part of me knew it would only come back. Driving home felt like admitting defeat, but where the hell else was I supposed to go? I had no family nearby, no money to disappear somewhere new, and no one who would believe me if I tried to explain. Every option felt like it circled back to the same place. That shitty apartment with the bed I no longer slept in, and the couch that dipped at 3:17 every night. I did not unlock the front door right away. I stood in the hallway, listening, waiting for some sign of it. Nothing, just silence. I stepped inside, gripping the hammer tight, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. The apartment smelled different. Damp, metallic, faintly rotten, the same smell that came off its breath when it leaned close to me. I gagged and covered my nose, pushing deeper inside. Everything looked normal at first glance, but I could feel the wrongness clinging to the air. I checked the bedroom, expecting the mattress to be torn open, but it looked untouched. The blankets I had abandoned were still crumpled in the closet where I had thrown them. The only change was on the wall above the bed. 3 long scratches carved deep into the paint, like claws dragged down from the ceiling to the floor. I backed out of the room and shut the door. That night, I tried something new. I left the apartment entirely and sat in my car in the parking lot. I told myself that if it was tied to the apartment, it would not follow me out here. I cracked the windows, leaned back in the seat, and forced my eyes shut. When I woke, it was to a soft tapping on the glass. I froze, eyes still closed, pulse racing. The tapping came again, deliberate and steady, like someone knocking with a fingernail. I opened my eyes. It was crouched just outside the car, its pale face pressed against the window, teeth bared in a grin, black eyes inches from mine, unblinking. I screamed and scrambled out the other side, falling hard on the asphalt. When I looked back, the car was empty, no one there. The windows were fogged with my own breath, nothing else. I did not go back inside the car. I ran up the stairs and locked myself in the apartment, shaking so badly I dropped the hammer twice. I did not even try to sleep. I sat at the table with every light on, whispering over and over that I could not do this anymore. By morning, I felt like my mind was unraveling. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow felt like it was stretching too long. I could not tell what was real anymore. I tried calling Eric again, desperate for someone to share this with, but his phone went straight to voicemail. 2 hours later, I got a text from an unknown number, a picture of me, sitting at my own kitchen table, head in my hands, taken from only a few feet away. I dropped the phone and staggered back. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely breathe. I checked every door, every window, locked, secure. But the photo was real. Someone had been here. Or maybe not someone. Maybe it never needed locks to keep it out. That night I tried another hotel, one I had never stayed at before. I checked in under cash, gave no real information, and dragged a chair against the door. I left the bathroom light on, sat on the bed, and stared at the blank television screen. At 3:17, the screen flickered. Static poured across it for a moment, then cleared into a grainy black and white image. My apartment bedroom. I saw the bed, the blankets still in the closet, the scratches on the wall, and then I saw it, crawling slowly out from under the bed, limbs bending wrong, head turning in jerks. It stared into the camera, into me, and smiled. The television went black. I ripped the cord from the wall and threw the remote across the room. I pressed myself against the far corner, shaking, muttering every prayer I could remember. At dawn, I left the hotel without checking out, just walked out the lobby door and drove until my hands cramped on the steering wheel. Everywhere I went it followed. Gas stations, diners, even walking through a crowded store. I would glance up and catch sight of a pale figure at the end of an aisle, head tilted, eyes locked on me. When I blinked, it was gone, but the dread never left. By the 5th week, I could not deny it anymore. This thing was not tied to a place. It was tied to me, and worse, it was getting stronger. It no longer needed the scratching to announce itself, no longer needed shadows or half glimpses. It was standing in front of me, watching, smiling, waiting. I started drinking to knock myself out. It worked for a few nights, or at least I thought it did. But even drunk, even passed out on the couch, I woke at 3:17 to find myself sitting upright with no memory of moving. The hammer was gone again, replaced with another brittle scrap of paper on my lap. 3 words: "You are mine." This time, when I burned it, the flames hissed like wet wood, and the smell was unbearable. My smoke alarm went off, but I did not care. I wanted it gone. I wanted all of this gone. The neighbors started avoiding me. They whispered in the hallway, eyes sliding past me like I was already dead. I could not blame them. I looked like hell. I smelled like smoke and fear. I called Eric one last time, begging him to answer, and this time he did. His voice was barely audible, a rasping whisper like he had been hollowed out. "It does not stop," he said. "You cannot get rid of it. The more you fight, the closer it gets. The only way is to give in." I shouted at him, demanded to know what that meant, but he only laughed, a dry, broken laugh that made my skin crawl. "It wants you," he whispered. "It has always wanted you." The line went dead. That night I did not sleep at all. I sat on the floor with every light burning and the hammer clutched tight. The apartment was silent, too silent, and the silence felt worse than the scratching ever had. At 3:17 the lights went out. When the lights died, the silence broke. The scratching started again, only this time it was not coming from under the bed or the couch. It was everywhere at once, crawling through the walls, shivering through the floorboards, humming in the air vents. I pressed my back against the wall, hammer tight in my hand, but the truth hit me like a fist in the chest. There was no place to swing. It was already inside every inch of this place, and maybe inside me too. I shouted into the dark, throat raw, "What the fuck do you want from me?" My voice bounced back empty, no echo, as if the apartment itself swallowed the sound. Then it answered, "You." That one word rattled the glass in the windows. The hammer slipped in my sweaty hands. I felt small, pathetic, like a kid lost in a storm. I wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. I wanted to fight, but there was nothing solid to hit. All I could do was stand there, panting like an animal, waiting for it to show itself. And it did. The corner of the room rippled like water. Out of it came a hand, long and pale, fingers bending back too far. Then the other hand, dragging its body out with jerks and snaps, as if bones cracked with every movement. Its head tilted, black eyes flashing in the dark. That grin again, stretching wider than a human mouth could manage. It pulled itself fully into the room, towering over me, limbs scraping against the ceiling. I smelled that same rot, metallic and damp, thick in my throat until I gagged. "You cannot fucking have me," I said, raising the hammer. It laughed, not loud but low, like air leaking from a coffin. It crouched, lowering itself until its face was only inches from mine. My arms shook, hammer raised, but I could not bring myself to swing. Its presence pressed against me like a weight, pinning me without touching me. It whispered again, that rasping, broken glass voice. "You brought me here. You are mine." And in that moment, I understood something. Fighting it, running from it, even screaming at it, all of it fed the thing. Every time I resisted, it got stronger. It wanted me terrified, thrashing, hopeless. Eric had tried to tell me, but I had not listened. So I dropped the hammer. The metal clanged against the floor, sharp and final. The grin faltered for the first time. I said, steady as I could manage, "Fine, take me, but you leave everyone else the fuck alone." For a long moment, nothing moved. Its head cocked to the side, studying me like a specimen. Then it leaned closer, close enough that the cold of it sank into my skin. Its jagged teeth grazed my ear as it whispered, "Mine." And just like that, the lights snapped back on. The thing was gone. No scraping, no scratching, no smell. Just me, alone in the apartment, hammer lying useless on the floor. I stood there shaking, waiting for it to return, but nothing happened. Days passed, then a week. For the first time since the farmhouse, I slept through the night. No 317 scratching, no whispers, no pale hands reaching out. My cat even came back, thin and trembling, but alive. It was like the nightmare had lifted, but something had changed. I caught myself in the mirror one morning, brushing my teeth, and froze. My eyes looked darker, not in color but in depth, like they were reflecting something they should not. When I leaned closer, the reflection smiled before I did. The paper showed up again, too, not on the passenger seat or the kitchen table this time. It was tucked neatly under my pillow, brittle and yellowed, 3 words scrawled in the same shaky hand: "You are mine." I burned it again, and again it refused to turn to ash. The flames hissed, then sputtered out, leaving the paper untouched. I buried it in the dumpster behind the building. The next morning, it was back on my nightstand. And still, the scratching has not returned. The thing no longer crawls out from under my bed, no longer presses its face to the glass, because it does not need to. I feel it when I close my eyes, sitting just behind me, watching, not separate anymore, but stitched into me. I dream of crawling through walls, of sliding under beds, of grinning down at terrified strangers. I wake up with my fingers aching like they have been clawing wood all night. Eric does not answer calls anymore. I do not know if he gave in the same way I did or if he is gone entirely. I have not seen him, not at work, not in town, not anywhere. Sometimes I wonder if I will run into him in a crowd and recognize the same darkness sitting just under his skin. But here is the truth I cannot ignore. I am not scared anymore. I should be, but I am not. The fear has burned out, hollowed me, left only something calm and cold in its place. The thing got what it wanted, and when I lie in bed now, I do not hear scratching. I hear breathing, my own, but doubled, in and out, in perfect rhythm with me. I know what that means. I am not waiting for it to crawl out anymore. It is not under the bed. It is not outside the door. It is inside, and it will never leave. It started with a text in the middle of the night. My phone buzzed at 3:02 in the morning, jolting me awake from a half-remembered dream. The message was from my boss. Just 3 words that made my skin prickle in the darkness. "Go outside. Let's talk." I lay there staring at the glowing screen, my mind trying to make sense of it. I could see his name at the top of the message, the same contact I had saved months ago when I first joined the company. There was no mistaking it, but why would he be texting me in the middle of the night, telling me to come outside? I texted back immediately, "Is everything okay?" I typed, my thumbs trembling a little. No reply came, not even the familiar 3 dots of a typing indicator. I lay in bed for a long time after that, the blue glow of the phone screen painting the ceiling in cold light. I thought about getting up, about going to the window and looking out into the quiet street. But I didn't. I stayed right where I was, listening to the soft creaks of the old house and the distant hum of the refrigerator downstairs. When morning finally came, I got up and went through the motions of getting ready for work. Shower, coffee, a half-hearted attempt at breakfast. But all the while, that text sat heavy in my mind, like a stone in the pit of my stomach. At work, everything seemed normal. My boss came in around 9, coffee in hand, his usual tired smile on his face. I watched him for a while, trying to decide how to bring it up. Eventually, during a lull in the day, I walked over to his office and knocked on the door. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "Did you mean to text me last night? About going outside?" He looked up from his computer, his brow furrowing. "Text you? No, I didn't send you anything." I pulled out my phone and showed him the message. His face went pale as he read it. "That's weird," he said finally. "I didn't send that. Look." He turned his phone around to show me his call log and messages. There was nothing there. No message to me, no record of any conversation. For a moment, we both just sat there in the quiet. The only sound was the low hum of the air conditioning and the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights. "Maybe it was a glitch," I said, though the words felt empty in my mouth. "Yeah, maybe," he agreed, but his eyes were troubled. I went back to my desk and tried to focus on work, but every time I glanced at my phone, I saw that message staring back at me. "Go outside. Let's talk." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the moment over and over in my head, wondering if I had imagined it, if maybe I had been half asleep and dreamed the whole thing. But when I checked my phone, the message was still there, as real as anything. Around midnight, I finally gave up on sleep and went downstairs to make tea. The kitchen was cold, the tile floor icy under my bare feet. I stood there, waiting for the kettle to boil, and listened to the quiet of the house. My phone was on the counter, the screen dark and smooth. I couldn't bring myself to pick it up. After a while, I went back upstairs and crawled into bed, pulling the blanket up to my chin. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and tried to convince myself that it was all just a mistake. But around 3 in the morning I heard it. My name, whispered just outside the window. I froze, every muscle in my body going tense. I strained to listen, my breath caught in my throat. Again, soft and low, my name drifting through the dark. "Come outside," the voice said. "Let's talk." I didn't move. I couldn't. My hands were clenched so tight around the blanket that my knuckles ached. I stared at the window, but the curtains were closed, and all I could see was the faint outline of the glass in the dim light. I don't know how long I lay there like that, listening to the silence that followed. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep, because the next thing I remember is waking up to the pale light of dawn creeping through the curtains. I got up slowly, my whole body stiff. I went to the window and pulled back the curtain just enough to see outside. The street was empty, the early morning light painting everything in soft gold. Nothing moved, no sign of anyone standing out there in the night. I made coffee and tried to shake off the feeling of dread that clung to me. I told myself it was just a dream, that I had imagined it because of the text. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. At work, I didn't mention it. My boss seemed normal enough, greeting everyone with the same tired smile. But when our eyes met across the office, I thought I saw something there. A flicker of uncertainty, maybe, or fear. I spent the whole day feeling like I was walking through fog, every sound muffled, every movement slow. My phone stayed in my pocket, but I could feel it there, heavy and cold against my leg. That night, I went to bed early, hoping that if I was asleep before 3, I wouldn't hear it again, but sleep wouldn't come. I lay there in the dark, listening to the soft ticking of the clock on the nightstand and the distant rumble of cars on the main road. At exactly 3:02, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I didn't want to look. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might stop. But I reached for it anyway, my fingers trembling. The message was the same. Go outside. Let's talk. I didn't move. I didn't reply. I just stared at the screen until the letters blurred and my eyes burned. Outside the window, the night was still, but I swear I could feel someone watching me, just beyond the glass. I woke up the next morning with a dull ache behind my eyes, the kind that comes from not sleeping enough. The house was quiet, but it was not the comforting kind of quiet. It felt thick, like something was pressing down on the walls, making the air taste different. I moved slowly, every step deliberate, like I was afraid to wake something that might still be sleeping. I went through the motions of getting ready for work, but I could not stop thinking about the message on my phone. I kept seeing those words over and over, like they had been burned onto the back of my eyelids. Go outside. Let's talk. My stomach felt tight, and every sound seemed too loud, too sharp. When I got to the office, I tried to act normal. My boss was already there, his tie slightly crooked, a coffee cup steaming on his desk. He looked up when I walked in and gave me a quick smile. But there was something in his eyes that made me pause, a flicker of uncertainty, or maybe just tiredness. "Morning," he said. "Morning," I replied, trying to keep my voice even. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop, but I could not focus. My mind kept drifting back to the text, to the voice outside my window. I kept telling myself it had to be a coincidence, a glitch, or some kind of prank. But no matter how many times I repeated it in my head, I did not believe it. Around mid-morning, I decided to check my phone again. The message was still there, as clear as it had been in the middle of the night. I stared at it for a long time, trying to make sense of it. I even checked the number again, hoping maybe it had been spoofed somehow, but it was his number, no doubt. I thought about talking to him, about showing him the message again, but I could not bring myself to do it. I did not want to see that look in his eyes again, the one that said he was just as confused and scared as I was. Instead, I buried myself in work, forcing my mind to focus on the small, tedious tasks that usually help me feel grounded. But today, it did not work. Every few minutes, I found my eyes drifting to the window, the pale winter light making everything outside look washed out and unreal. At lunch, I went outside to get some air. The wind was cold and sharp, biting at my cheeks and making my eyes water. I stood there for a long time, watching the cars pass by, the people hurrying along the sidewalk. None of them looked at me. None of them seemed to notice the way I kept glancing over my shoulder. When I went back inside, my boss was in the break room, staring out the window with a frown on his face. I hesitated, then walked over. "Did you sleep okay last night?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He turned to look at me, his brow furrowed. "Not really," he admitted. I kept waking up, feeling like there was something I was supposed to remember. I swallowed hard. "Like what?" He shook his head. "I don't know. It's stupid." I wanted to tell him about the voice outside my window, about how I had felt it more than heard it, but the words caught in my throat, and I just nodded instead. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I answered emails, made small talk with coworkers, all the while feeling like I was moving through water. Everything felt muffled and slow. That night, I sat on the couch with the TV on, the sound turned down low. I kept glancing at my phone, half afraid to see another message, half disappointed when it stayed silent. Around midnight, I finally went upstairs to bed. I stood at the window for a long time, staring out into the darkness. The street was empty, the houses across the way dark and quiet. I told myself there was nothing out there, that it was just the wind I had heard the night before. I closed the curtains and crawled into bed, pulling the blanket up to my chin. My heart was beating too fast, and I kept telling myself to breathe, to calm down. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw those words again. "Go outside. Let's talk." I must have drifted off at some point, because I woke up with a start, my mouth dry and my hands clenched into fists. It was 3:02 in the morning again. My phone buzzed once, then went silent. I stared at it, my breath caught in my throat. Slowly, I reached for it, my fingers numb. The message was the same. "Go outside. Let's talk." I felt a wave of cold roll through me, my skin prickling with goosebumps. I lay there, frozen, listening to the quiet of the house, the ticking of the clock, the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs. But underneath it all, there was something else. A low, soft whisper, just outside the window. I squeezed my eyes shut, telling myself it was just the wind, just my mind playing tricks on me. But I knew it wasn't. I knew that voice was real. In the morning I looked like hell. My eyes were red and puffy, my hands shaking as I tried to drink my coffee. My boss avoided my gaze when I came in, his face pale and drawn. I wanted to ask him about it, to tell him about the voice, but I could not find the words. Instead, I just sat there, the weight of the unspoken hanging heavy between us. Later that day, I found a small note on my desk. Just a scrap of paper, folded once. No name, no signature. I unfolded it slowly, my hands trembling. The words were simple, "You know me." I stared at it for a long time, my heart thudding in my chest. I did not know who had written it, but I knew they were right. The note stayed in my pocket all day. I kept touching it, checking to make sure it was still there, as if it might vanish and take the whole strange experience with it. The words on the paper were simple, but they echoed in my mind with a weight that felt disproportionate to their size. "You know me." I did not know who had written it. but the certainty in the statement was unsettling. At work, I tried to act normal, but I was distracted. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped. I kept glancing at my boss, wondering if he was watching me, if he knew something he wasn't saying. But he seemed as tired and distracted as I felt. We exchanged polite greetings, but there was a distance between us that hadn't been there before. I considered showing him the note, but I hesitated. What if he thought I was losing my mind? What if he was involved somehow? The uncertainty was paralyzing. I decided to keep it to myself, at least for now. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the creaks and groans of the house settling. Every sound seemed amplified in the darkness. I kept checking my phone, half expecting another message, but it remained silent. Around 3 a.m, I heard a noise outside my window. A soft tapping, like someone gently knocking on the glass. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The tapping continued, steady and deliberate. I wanted to look, to see who or what was out there, but I was afraid. I pulled the covers over my head and lay there, trembling, until the sound stopped. Eventually, exhaustion overtook fear, and I drifted into a restless sleep. The next morning, I checked the window. There were no marks, no signs that anyone had been there. I told myself it was just a branch, the wind, my imagination, but I didn't believe it. At work, I was on edge. I kept expecting something to happen, for someone to say something that would make sense of the strange events. But the day passed uneventfully. My boss was quiet, focused on his work. I tried to do the same, but my mind kept drifting. During my lunch break, I stepped outside for some fresh air. The sky was overcast, the air cool and damp. I walked around the block, trying to clear my head. As I turned the corner, I saw a figure standing across the street, watching me. I couldn't make out any details, but something about the posture, the stillness, was unsettling. I stopped, staring back. The figure didn't move. I took a step forward, and it turned and walked away, disappearing around the corner. I hesitated, then followed, but when I reached the spot, the street was empty. I returned to the office, shaken. I didn't mention it to anyone. What could I say? That I was being followed by a shadow, that I was receiving messages from someone who didn't exist. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. That night, I decided to confront whatever was happening. I set my phone on the nightstand and left the curtains open. I sat in a chair by the window, waiting. The hours passed slowly. The street outside was quiet, the occasional car passing by. At exactly 3 a.m, my phone buzzed. I picked it up, my hands trembling. The message was the same. "Go outside, let's talk." I stood up, heart pounding, and walked to the front door. I hesitated, hand on the doorknob. I didn't know what I was expecting to find, but I knew I had to face it. I opened the door and stepped outside. The street was empty, the air was still, the silence heavy. I looked around, searching for any sign of movement, but there was nothing. I took a few steps forward, then stopped. "Hello," I called out. My voice sounded small and uncertain. There was no response. I turned to go back inside, but something caught my eye. A piece of paper pinned to the door. I reached out and took it, unfolding it carefully. The message was short: "You're not alone." I stood there staring at the words, a chill running down my spine. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew it was true. Whatever was happening, I wasn't alone. I went back inside and locked the door. I sat down, the note in my hand, and tried to make sense of it all. The messages, the voice, the figure on the street. It felt like a puzzle, but I didn't have all the pieces. I thought about my boss, about the confusion on his face when I showed him the first message. Was he part of this, or was he a victim too? I didn't know. I decided to do some research. I spent the next few hours online looking for stories of similar experiences. I found forums filled with people sharing tales of mysterious messages, voices in the night, unexplained phenomena. Some were clearly hoaxes, others delusions, but a few felt eerily similar to my own experience. One story stood out. A woman described receiving messages from a number she didn't recognize, messages that seemed to know her thoughts, her fears. She spoke of a presence that watched her, that whispered to her in the dark. She said it started after she began working at a new job, that her boss seemed unaware but somehow connected. The parallels were unsettling. I reached out to her, sending a message through the forum. I didn't expect a response, but it felt like something I had to do. As dawn approached, I sat by the window, watching the sky lighten. I felt a strange sense of calm. I didn't have answers, but I wasn't alone. Someone else had experienced this. Maybe together, we could find the truth. I didn't know what the next message would say, or what the voice would whisper next, but I was ready to listen. The day after I sent that message on the forum, I kept checking my phone for a response, but nothing came. I tried to tell myself it was fine, that maybe she just hadn't seen it yet. But deep down I felt that same cold knot of dread in my stomach, the sense that something was moving just out of sight. At work, everything was normal on the surface. My boss was his usual self, focused and polite, but I noticed he kept glancing at me when he thought I wasn't looking. Little flickers of worry, or maybe recognition. I couldn't tell anymore. Around midday, I decided to take a walk outside to clear my head. The air was crisp and smelled faintly of wet earth, the kind of smell that always reminded me of childhood. I walked slowly, my hands in my pockets, trying to shake off the feeling that something was following me. Every time I turned a corner, I half expected to see that figure again, standing just beyond the edge of my vision. When I got back to the office, there was a small envelope on my desk, no name, no return address. I looked around, but no one seemed to be paying attention. My heart was beating fast as I picked it up and slipped it into my bag. I waited until I got home that evening to open it. I sat at the kitchen table, the envelope heavy in my hand. When I finally tore it open, I found a single piece of paper inside, folded once. It was a printout of one of my social media posts from years ago, a photo I had taken at the beach, the sun setting behind me, my hair tangled from the wind. It was a happy memory, a moment of peace. But across the photo, in dark ink, someone had written, "I was there." I stared at the words, my hands trembling. My first instinct was to think it was a joke, some twisted prank by someone who knew me well enough to dig through my past. But the more I thought about it, the less sure I felt. There was something personal in the way it was written, something that made my skin crawl. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, the photo on the nightstand beside me. and listened to the house settle around me. Every creak and sigh felt amplified, like the walls were whispering secrets I couldn't quite hear. Around 3 in the morning, my phone buzzed again. My breath caught in my throat as I picked it up, already knowing what I would see. "Go outside. Let's talk." I sat there for a long time, the message burning into my eyes. Part of me wanted to get up, to open the door and end this once and for all, but I couldn't. My legs felt like they were filled with lead, my body frozen in place. I finally set the phone down and pulled the blanket up to my chin, telling myself I would deal with it in the morning. But morning came, and I still didn't know what to do. I went to work as usual, trying to act like everything was fine. My boss greeted me with a tired smile, his eyes shadowed like he hadn't slept either. We worked side by side, but the silence between us felt heavy, like there was something neither of us was willing to say. I thought about asking him again, about the messages and the voice outside my window. But every time I opened my mouth, the words died in my throat. That afternoon, I got a reply on the forum, a short message, almost hesitant. "I know what you're going through. You're not imagining it. It's real." I read it over and over, my hands shaking. I wanted to ask 100 questions, to demand answers, but all I could type was, "What do I do?" The reply came quickly. "Don't go outside. Whatever it is, it wants you to let it in." I sat there staring at the screen, the words ringing in my head. Don't go outside. It was such a simple instruction, but it felt like a lifeline, a thread of safety in a world that suddenly felt unsteady. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. I sat in the living room with all the lights on, the TV playing softly in the background. I kept my phone on the coffee table, but I didn't touch it. At exactly 3 in the morning, it buzzed. "Go outside. Let's talk." I didn't move. I didn't even look at the window. I just sat there, listening to the quiet voice in my head that kept repeating, "Don't go outside. Don't go outside." Minutes passed, then an hour. The message sat on my screen like a challenge, but I didn't give in. I waited until the first light of dawn crept through the curtains before I let myself breathe again. The next day at work, my boss pulled me aside. He looked tired, his eyes bloodshot and shadowed. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low. I hesitated, then nodded, "Just tired." He looked like he wanted to say more, but he didn't. He just nodded and went back to his office, closing the door behind him. I went back to my desk, but I couldn't focus. The day passed in a blur, my mind stuck on the messages, the voice, the warning. When I got home that night, I locked every door and window and turned on every light. I sat at the kitchen table, the envelope and the photo in front of me. I thought about the way the message had said, "I was there," and a part of me wondered if this had started long before the first message. If it had been following me for years, watching from the shadows. I didn't know what it wanted or why it had chosen me, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let it in. The days that followed felt like they blurred together. Everything outside of work and my house became a kind of static, like the world was moving on without me, and I was stuck in a slow motion loop. I kept going through the motions, getting up in the morning, going to work, pretending to be fine, but inside I was always listening for the buzz of my phone, for that quiet voice outside my window. At work, my boss seemed just as on edge as I was. He He would start to say something, then stop himself, his eyes flicking to mine with that same haunted look I was sure I was wearing too. I wondered if he was getting messages too, if he was hearing things in the middle of the night. I wanted to ask, but every time I opened my mouth, the words caught in my throat. One night I decided to stay up again just to see if it would happen. I made a pot of tea and sat by the window, the curtains pulled back so I could see the street. The world outside looked calm, the streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement, but I could not shake the feeling that there was something just beyond the light, waiting for me to look away. At exactly 3 a.m, my phone buzzed. I didn't need to check to know what it said. Go outside. Let's talk. I stared at the message for a long time, my fingers hovering over the screen. I thought about replying, about telling it to leave me alone, but I knew it would not matter. It would not stop just because I asked. Instead, I put the phone down and closed my eyes, focusing on my breathing. I kept repeating the words from the forum in my mind. Don't go outside. Don't let it in. When the sun finally came up, I felt like I had survived something, but I also felt more tired than I had ever been, like each night was chipping away at me, piece by piece. At work the next day, my boss called me into his office. He looked worse than I had ever seen him, pale, with dark circles under his eyes like he had not slept in weeks. He closed the door behind me and leaned against his desk. "Have you been getting any strange messages?" he asked, his voice low and careful. I hesitated, then nodded. Yes, always at the same time. He swallowed hard. 3 a.m. I nodded again. He sat down heavily in his chair, rubbing his face with his hands. "I keep getting them too," he said, "but when I check my phone in the morning, they're gone. No record of them at all." I felt a shiver run down my spine. "Mine are still there," I said. "They don't disappear." He looked up at me, his eyes wide. "I think it wants you more than it wants me." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and final. I wanted to deny it, to tell him he was wrong, but I couldn't. Deep down, I knew he was right. That night, I got another message, but this time it was different. It was longer. "I have been waiting. You know me. Come outside, let's talk." The words felt colder somehow, more deliberate. I sat there, staring at them, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. I did not go outside. I stayed inside, every light on, the curtains drawn tight, but I could feel it out there, waiting. I did not sleep at all that night. I just sat and listened to the quiet house, every small sound magnified by the silence. The next morning, I felt like a ghost in my own skin. I moved through the day like I was underwater, everything muffled and slow. My boss avoided my eyes, and I did not try to force the conversation. We both knew there was nothing either of us could say that would make sense of what was happening. When I got home that evening, I found another note slipped under my door. The handwriting was the same as before, small and neat, almost careful. It said, "You are almost ready." I felt sick as I read it, the words sinking into me like ice. Almost ready for what? I did not know, and the not knowing was almost worse than anything else. I sat down on the floor, my back against the door, and tried to think. I thought about the first message, the first time I heard the voice outside the window. I thought about the photo, the note that said, "I was there." All of it felt like pieces of something bigger, something I could not see clearly. I pulled out my phone and read through every message again, each one like a puzzle piece that did not quite fit. My mind kept circling back to that line from the forum, "Don't let it in." I decided then that I would not go outside no matter what, no matter how many times it asked, no matter how real it felt. I would not give it what it wanted. The next night I sat by the window again. I watched the street, the way the shadows seemed to stretch and move when I wasn't looking directly at them. At 3 in the morning, the message came again. "Go outside. Let's talk." I didn't move. I didn't even look at the phone. I just sat there, my hands clenched into fists in my lap, my breath slow and steady. Outside, the night was silent, but I could feel it. I could feel the weight of its attention, like a hand pressed against the glass. I sat there until the first light of dawn touched the sky, the shadows pulling back and leaving the world clean and new. I felt like I had won something, even if it was just for one more night. When I went to work the next day, I felt different, tired but resolute. My boss met my eyes for the first time in days, and I saw the same quiet determination there. We didn't speak about it. We didn't have to. We both knew that whatever this was, we were in it together. The final night began like all the others. I made tea, turned on every light in the house, and settled into my usual chair by the window. My phone lay face down on the coffee table, the weight of it like an unspoken question in the quiet room. I watched the street, the way the shadows played under the soft glow of the lampposts. Everything looked so normal, so ordinary, but the stillness felt charged with something I could not name. I thought about all the nights that had come before, each one a test of my resolve. I thought about the messages, the notes, the voice outside my window. I thought about my boss and the look in his eyes that told me he understood more than either of us wanted to admit. And I thought about that line I had read on the forum, the one that had become my mantra. "Don't let it in." At exactly 3 in the morning, my phone buzzed once. I did not pick it up. I did not need to. I already knew what it would say. "Go outside. Let's talk." I closed my eyes and let the words wash over me, feeling the familiar chill crawl down my spine, but I did not move. Minutes passed. The room was so quiet I could hear the soft tick of the kitchen clock. I kept my breathing slow and even, my hands resting in my lap. Outside the window, the world looked unchanged. But I knew better. I could feel it, the weight of something standing just beyond the glow of the porch light. I thought about the figure I had seen that day on the street, the way it had watched me without moving. I thought about the voice in the dark, the way it had whispered my name like it was something it owned. And I thought about the note I had found that said, "You are almost ready." I did not know what it wanted from me. Maybe it was nothing more than to see me open the door, to see me take that first step outside. Maybe it was something older and colder than I could understand. But I knew one thing for sure. I was not going to give it what it wanted. I sat there until the first light of dawn turned the sky, a soft, pale gold. The message was still on my phone, the screen dark and silent. I stood up, my legs stiff and aching, and walked to the window. I pulled the curtains back and looked out at the empty street. The world looked so peaceful in the early morning light, and for a moment I let myself believe that it was over, that whatever it was, it had given up. I turned away and went to wake my son. He was still sleeping, his small body curled under the blankets. I brushed a strand of hair from his forehead and kissed his cheek. The normalcy of it grounded me, reminded me of who I was and what I was fighting for. At work, my boss caught my eye as I walked in. He looked better, the shadows under his eyes not as dark as they had been. He gave me a small nod, and I nodded back. We did not need to say anything. We both knew that whatever had been haunting us had started to lose its hold. The rest of the day passed in a gentle blur. I answered emails, made small talk with my coworkers, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was part of the world again. The weight that had been pressing down on me for so long felt lighter, like I could finally take a full breath. That night, I did not sit by the window. I did not make tea or turn on every light. I let the house stay quiet, the soft shadows pooling in the corners like they always had. I put my phone in a drawer and left it there, refusing to let its buzzing pull me back into the fear. When I lay down to sleep, I felt the bed settle around me like an embrace. I closed my eyes and listened to the gentle sounds of the house, the pipes clicking softly as they cooled, the wind brushing against the glass. No tapping, no voice, just the quiet comfort of being inside, safe. I dreamed of the ocean that night, of standing on the shore, the waves rolling in and out, each one a soft hush against the sand. I dreamed of the sun on my face, warm and bright, and the feeling of being small in a vast open world. It was the kind of dream that left me calm when I woke, the kind that felt more real than anything else. In the morning, I checked my phone. There was no new message, no whisper in the dark, just the normal clutter of notifications and missed calls that life always brings. I smiled and put it back in the drawer. As the days turned into weeks, the messages stopped altogether. My boss and I never spoke of it again, but I could tell from the way he carried himself that he felt it too, the shift, the release of something that had been gripping us so tightly. We went back to our routines, our small talk and our coffee breaks, and little by little, the weight of those nights became just another story I carried with me. A memory that reminded me how close the past can feel when you let it in. Sometimes late at night, I still find myself listening to the quiet. I still watch the shadows, just to be sure, but there is no fear in it anymore. Just a quiet vigilance, a reminder that I am stronger than the things that tried to break me. I do not know what it was that haunted me, if it was something in the dark, or just the echo of old fears that found a new voice. Maybe it does not matter. What matters is that I did not let it in. And now, when I walk out into the world, I carry that knowledge with me like a shield, the certainty that no matter what waits in the night, I am not alone, and I will not be moved. We had only been in the new house for a few weeks when the drawing showed up. It was a quiet cul-de-sac in Birmingham, the kind of place where neighbors wave from their driveways and kids ride bikes until the streetlights flicker on. Our daughter Ellie had already made a few friends, and one of them was a boy named Callum. He lived 2 doors down and had a habit of sketching houses in the neighborhood. It was his thing. Every few days he would hand someone a crayon drawing of their home, complete with stick figures and smiling suns. It was sweet, really, a little odd maybe, but harmless. One afternoon, Ellie came home with a folded piece of paper. "Callum drew our house," she said, holding it out with a grin. I unfolded it, expecting the usual childlike scrawl, and it was, mostly. The red brick facade, the white door, the two front windows. Even the garden gnome we had inherited from the previous owners was there, standing sentinel by the walkway. But then I noticed the attic window. It was small, tucked beneath the sloping roof, and in the drawing it was shaded dark. Inside a figure stood, not a stick figure like the rest, but a tall, thin shape with glowing eyes. Two bright circles staring out from the blackness. I frowned. Ellie, did Callum say anything about this? She shrugged. He said it's the man who sleeps up there. He watches you. A chill ran down my spine. Our attic window doesn't face the street. It's on the side of the house overlooking the backyard. From the front, it's not visible at all. For Callum to draw it, he'd have to know what it looked like. He'd have to have seen it from inside. That night, I mentioned it to my husband, Mark. Probably just his imagination, he said, trying to sound reassuring. Kids make stuff up all the time. Maybe, I replied, but the unease lingered. The next day, I decided to talk to Callum's mother, Sarah. We had exchanged pleasantries before, but this was the first time I approached her with concern. "Hi, Sarah," I began. "I wanted to ask you about Callum's drawings." She smiled warmly. "Oh yes, he's always been into art. Loves drawing houses." "I noticed he drew our attic window," I said carefully. "It's not visible from the street." Her smile faltered. "Well, he has a vivid imagination. Sometimes he adds things that aren't there." "Did he ever mention being inside our house?" She shook her head. "No, I don't think so. Why?" I hesitated. "He said there's a man who sleeps in our attic, that he watches us." Sarah's expression turned serious. "I'm sorry. That does sound unsettling. I'll talk to him." I thanked her and left, feeling no more at ease than before. That evening I decided to check the attic. The entrance was a pull-down ladder in the hallway ceiling. I climbed up, flashlight in hand, and pushed open the hatch. The attic was empty, just as we had left it. A few boxes, some old furniture, and a layer of dust covering everything. No signs of anyone living there. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Over the next few days I tried to put it out of my mind, but then strange things started happening. I would find the attic hatch slightly ajar, even though I was sure I had closed it. Items in the house seemed to move on their own. A book left on the coffee table would be on the floor the next morning. The kitchen light would be on when I was certain I had turned it off. One night I woke up to the sound of footsteps above us. Mark was asleep beside me, and Ellie was in her room. I held my breath, listening. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, moving across the attic floor. I nudged Mark awake. "Do you hear that?" He listened, then shook his head, probably the house settling. "No," I insisted, "it's footsteps." He sighed and got out of bed. "I'll check." I followed him to the hallway. He pulled down the ladder and climbed up, flashlight in hand. "Nothing up here," he called down after a few minutes. "Just the usual stuff." I still felt uneasy. The next morning, I found another drawing on our doorstep. It was of our house again, but this time, the figure in the attic window was larger, more detailed. The glowing eyes were more pronounced, and the figure's hand was pressed against the glass. I showed it to Mark. "This is getting creepy," he admitted. "Maybe we should install some cameras." We set up a security system, placing cameras around the house and one in the attic. That night, we monitored the feeds from our phones. Around 2 in the morning, the attic camera picked up movement. A shadow passed across the screen, then disappeared. Mark grabbed a baseball bat and headed for the attic. I followed, heart pounding. He climbed up and shone the flashlight around. "Nothing," he said, but the camera picked up something. We reviewed the footage again. The shadow was there, unmistakable. We called the police. An officer arrived and inspected the attic. He found no signs of forced entry, no evidence of anyone living there. "Could be a glitch in the camera," he suggested. But we knew what we saw. The next day, I spoke to Sarah again. "Has Callum said anything else about the man in our attic?" She looked uncomfortable. "He mentioned that the man is sad, that he watches because he's lonely." I felt a shiver run through me. "Does he say where he comes from?" She hesitated. "Callum says he was here before your family moved in." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the figure in the attic, the glowing eyes, the sense of being watched. I decided to go up there one more time. I climbed the ladder, flashlight in hand, and looked around. In the corner, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A small, childlike drawing on the wall. It was of our house, with the attic window shaded dark, and inside the figure with glowing eyes. Beneath it, in a child's handwriting, were the words, "He watches because he's lonely." I stared at it, heart pounding. Who had drawn this? When? I climbed down and closed the hatch, making sure it was secure. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. The morning after discovering the drawing in the attic, I couldn't shake the unease that had settled in my chest. The figure with glowing eyes, the child's handwriting, "He watches because he's lonely," it all felt too deliberate, too personal. I decided to take a day off work to clear my head and perhaps find some rational explanation. I spent the morning researching the history of our house. The local library had archives of property records and old newspapers. I hoped to find anything that could shed light on the strange occurrences. The librarian, a kind elderly woman named Margaret, helped me navigate the dusty files. After hours of sifting through documents, I found a newspaper article from decades ago. It detailed a tragic incident. A man named Thomas lived in our house and was found dead in the attic. The article mentioned that he was a recluse, rarely seen by neighbors, and had no known family. The cause of death was listed as natural causes, but the circumstances were odd. He had been dead for weeks before anyone noticed. I felt a chill run down my spine. Could this be the man Callum referred to? The one who sleeps up there and watches us? I photocopied the article and took it home. That evening, I showed the article to Mark. He read it silently, his brow furrowed. "This is unsettling," he admitted, "but it was a long time ago. Maybe it's just a coincidence." "Maybe," I replied, though I wasn't convinced. We decided to talk to Callum again. Perhaps he knew more than he let on. The next day, we invited him over for some lemonade and biscuits. He arrived, cheerful as ever, clutching his sketch pad. "Callum," I began gently, Can you tell us more about the man in the attic? He looked up, his expression serious. He's always there. He watches because he's lonely. How do you know he's there? Mark asked. Callum shrugged. He told me. Mark and I exchanged glances. He spoke to you? Callum nodded. In my dreams. He says he used to live here and misses it. I felt a lump form in my throat. Did he say his name? Callum thought for a moment. Thomas. That was the name from the article. I felt the blood drain from my face. Thank you, Callum, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. That's very helpful. After Callum left, Mark and I sat in silence. This is getting too strange, he said finally. Maybe we should have the house blessed or something. I nodded. It's worth a try. We contacted a local priest, Father Andrew, who agreed to come by the next day. He arrived with a calm demeanor and listened patiently as we recounted the events. I've dealt with similar situations, he said. Sometimes spirits linger due to unresolved matters. A blessing might help. He walked through the house, sprinkling holy water and reciting prayers. When he reached the attic, he paused. This place feels heavy, he murmured, as if someone is still holding on. He performed a more thorough blessing in the attic, then turned to us. I suggest you speak to him, he said. Let him know it's time to move on. That night, I stood in the attic, heart pounding. Thomas, I said aloud, I know you used to live here, but it's time to rest. You don't have to watch over us anymore. The air felt still, almost expectant. I waited, but nothing happened. Over the next few days, the strange occurrences ceased. The attic hatch remained closed, and there were no more drawings. I began to relax, thinking perhaps the blessing had worked. Then, one morning, I found a new drawing on our doorstep. It was our house again, but this time the figure in the attic was smiling. The glowing eyes were softer, and beneath the drawing were the words, "Thank you." I showed it to Mark, who smiled. Maybe he just needed to be acknowledged, he said. I nodded, feeling a sense of peace. From that day on, there were no more disturbances. The house felt lighter, more welcoming. Callum continued to draw, but his sketches were now of gardens and sunny days. Life returned to normal, and I often thought of Thomas, hoping he had found the rest he deserved. After the blessing, things seemed to settle. The house felt lighter, and the oppressive atmosphere that had lingered since we moved in began to dissipate. Mark and I started to relax, believing that perhaps the spirit of Thomas had finally found peace. Ellie returned to her cheerful self, and even Callum's drawings took on a more vibrant tone, depicting sunny days and playful scenes. But peace, as we soon discovered, was fleeting. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, Ellie approached me with a concerned expression. "Mom," she said, "Callum gave me another drawing today." I dried my hands and took the paper from her. It was our house again, but this time the figure in the attic window was different. The glowing eyes were gone, replaced by a dark, featureless silhouette. Beneath the drawing, in Callum's neat handwriting, were the words, "He's not alone." A chill ran down my spine. "Did Callum say anything else?" I asked. Ellie nodded. "He said the man has a friend now, someone who doesn't like us." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Callum's words in my mind. Who was this new presence, and why did it feel so menacing? The next morning I decided to speak with Sarah again. She greeted me warmly, but her smile faded when I mentioned the new drawing. "Callum's been having nightmares," she admitted. "He talks in his sleep, says things about shadows and whispers. I've been meaning to talk to you about it." I shared my concerns, and we agreed to keep a closer eye on the children. Days passed, and the atmosphere in our home grew tense once more. Strange occurrences resumed. Objects moved on their own, cold spots appeared in rooms, and the unsettling feeling of being watched returned. One afternoon, while cleaning the attic, I discovered something peculiar. Hidden beneath a loose floorboard was an old dusty journal. Its pages were yellowed with age, and the handwriting was elegant and precise. As I flipped through the pages, I realized it belonged to Thomas. He wrote about his loneliness, his longing for companionship, and his belief that the house was alive, watching him. But towards the end, the entries took a darker turn. He mentioned a presence, a shadow that whispered to him, urging him to do unspeakable things. I felt a knot form in my stomach. That evening I shared the journal with Mark. He read it silently, his brow furrowed. "This shadow," he said, "it might be what's causing all of this." We decided to consult Father Andrew again. He listened intently as we recounted the recent events and examined the journal. "This is troubling," he said. "It seems Thomas wasn't just haunted by loneliness, but by something malevolent, a dark entity that may still reside in your home." He suggested a more thorough cleansing of the house, one that would require preparation and spiritual fortitude. In the days leading up to the cleansing, the disturbances intensified. Ellie began sleepwalking, often found standing beneath the attic hatch, staring upward. Mark started experiencing vivid nightmares, waking up drenched in sweat and gasping for air. The night before the cleansing, I awoke to a faint whispering. I followed the sound to the attic, where I found the hatch slightly ajar. Summoning my courage, I climbed the ladder and peeked inside. The attic was dark, but in the corner I saw two figures. One was the familiar silhouette of Thomas, his form faint and translucent. The other was a darker, more solid shadow, its presence oppressive and cold. They turned to face me, and I felt a wave of fear wash over me. The dark figure stepped forward, and I quickly retreated, slamming the hatch shut. The next day, Father Andrew arrived with two fellow priests. They conducted a thorough cleansing, reciting prayers and sprinkling holy water in every room. The atmosphere grew tense, and at one point, a loud crash echoed from the attic. After the ritual, Father Andrew approached us. "The dark presence has been weakened," he said, "but it's not gone. It feeds on fear and negativity. You must remain vigilant and keep your home filled with light and love." We took his advice to heart. We filled our home with laughter, music, and warmth. We spent more time together as a family, creating positive memories to counteract the darkness. Over time, the disturbances lessened. Callum's drawings returned to their cheerful nature, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. But every so often, I catch a glimpse of a shadow in the corner of my eye, or hear a faint whisper in the night. I know the darkness still lingers, waiting for a moment of weakness. And so, we remain vigilant, determined to protect our home and each other from the shadows that dwell within. The days following the second cleansing were quiet, almost unnaturally so. The house felt still, as if it were holding its breath. Mark and I tried to resume our normal routines, but a lingering unease clung to us. Ellie, however, seemed unaffected, her laughter echoing through the halls as she played with her toys. One afternoon, as I was tidying up the living room, I noticed a new drawing pinned to the refrigerator. It was another of Callum's creations, depicting our house once more. But this time the attic window was empty. No figures, no glowing eyes, just a blank pane of glass. Beneath the drawing, in Callum's neat handwriting, were the words, "He left." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Perhaps the second cleansing had worked. Maybe Thomas had finally found peace. That evening I decided to bake a batch of cookies and invite Sarah and Callum over for tea. As we sat around the kitchen table, the children playing nearby, I brought up the drawing. "Callum said the man left," I mentioned, trying to sound casual. Sarah nodded. "Yes, he told me the same. Said the man found a new home." "A new home?" I asked, puzzled. She hesitated. "He said the man moved into someone else's attic." I felt a chill run down my spine. Did he say whose? Sarah shook her head. "No, just that it was someone nearby." The conversation shifted to lighter topics, but I couldn't shake the unease that settled over me. That night, as I lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling, wondering who the new occupant of the attic might be. The following morning, I received a call from our neighbor, Mrs. Thompson. She sounded distressed. "Have you noticed anything strange lately?" she asked. I hesitated. "What do you mean?" "Odd noises, things moving on their own. My attic light keeps flickering, and I swear I hear footsteps up there at night." A knot formed in my stomach. "Have you checked the attic?" "Yes, but there's nothing there. Just old boxes and dust." I considered telling her about Thomas, but decided against it. Instead, I suggested she have her house blessed, just in case. Over the next few days, more neighbors reported similar occurrences: flickering lights, unexplained noises, and a general sense of unease. It seemed the presence had indeed moved on, but not far. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, Ellie approached me with a concerned expression. "Mom, Callum gave me another drawing." I took the paper from her and unfolded it. It was our street, each house meticulously drawn. In the attic window of each house, a small, dark figure stood. Beneath the drawing were the words, "He visits everyone now." I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. The presence hadn't just moved, it was spreading. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room, the lights on, listening for any unusual sounds. Around midnight, I heard a faint creaking noise coming from the attic. I held my breath, straining to hear more. The creaking continued, slow and deliberate. I woke Mark, and together we climbed the ladder to the attic. The space was empty, just as before, but the air felt heavy, charged with an unseen energy. We decided to consult Father Andrew once more. He arrived the next day, concern etched on his face. "This is unusual," he admitted. "Spirits don't typically move from house to house like this." "Is there anything we can do?" I asked. He nodded. "We can perform a neighborhood cleansing, but it will require the participation of all the residents." We spent the next few days speaking with our neighbors, explaining the situation as delicately as possible. Some were skeptical, others frightened, but eventually everyone agreed to participate. On the appointed day, Father Andrew led the cleansing, moving from house to house. reciting prayers and sprinkling holy water. The atmosphere was tense, but hopeful. After the ritual, the neighborhood felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. The strange occurrences ceased, and life slowly returned to normal. Weeks passed without incident. Ellie and Callum continued to play together, their laughter a comforting sound. The drawing stopped, and the attic remained quiet. One sunny afternoon, as I was tending to the garden, Callum approached me. "Mrs. Harper," he said, "I have something for you." He handed me a drawing, this one different from the others. It depicted our house bathed in sunlight, flowers blooming in the garden, and no figure in the attic window. Beneath the drawing were the words, "Peace." I smiled, tears welling in my eyes. "Thank you, Callum." As he ran off to play with Ellie, I looked up at the attic window. For the first time in weeks, I felt truly at ease. But deep down, I knew that peace could be fragile, and sometimes the past has a way of returning when you least expect it. The days following the neighborhood cleansing were filled with a cautious optimism. The air felt lighter, and the oppressive atmosphere that had once clung to our homes seemed to have dissipated. Children played outside without fear, and neighbors greeted each other with genuine smiles. It was as if a collective weight had been lifted from our shoulders. However, beneath the surface, a lingering unease remained. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching, waiting. The silence felt too complete, too artificial. It was the kind of quiet that precedes a storm. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, Ellie approached me with a drawing in her hand. Her expression was unreadable, a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "Mom," she said softly, "Callum gave me this today." I took the paper from her and unfolded it. It was our house again, meticulously drawn with crayon, but this time the attic window was different. Instead of a figure, there was a swirling mass of darkness, as if the crayon had been pressed harder, the strokes more frantic. Beneath the drawing were the words, "He's changing." A chill ran down my spine. I looked at Ellie, who was watching me intently. "Did Callum say anything else?" I asked. She nodded. "He said the man isn't the same anymore. He's angrier." That night, I found it difficult to sleep. The house was silent, but every creak and groan felt amplified. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts of the drawing and Callum's ominous words. Around midnight, I heard a faint scratching sound coming from the attic. I held my breath, straining to listen. The scratching continued, rhythmic and deliberate. I nudged Mark awake. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. He listened for a moment before nodding. "It's probably just a mouse or something." But I wasn't convinced. The sound was too deliberate, too intentional. The next morning I decided to investigate. I climbed the ladder to the attic, flashlight in hand. The space was as we had left it, dusty boxes, old furniture, and cobwebs. But in the corner, near the window, I noticed something new. There were deep scratch marks on the wooden floor, as if someone or something had been clawing at it. The marks were fresh, the wood splintered and raw. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding. I needed answers. I reached out to Father Andrew once more. He arrived later that day, his expression grave as I showed him the drawing and the scratch marks. "This is concerning," he said. "It seems the presence hasn't left. If anything, it's growing stronger." He suggested another cleansing, this time focusing solely on our house. That evening, he performed the ritual, reciting prayers and sprinkling holy water in every room. The atmosphere felt tense, the air thick with anticipation. As he concluded the ceremony, a loud bang echoed from the attic. We rushed upstairs, but the space was empty. The scratch marks, however, had multiplied, covering the floor in chaotic patterns. Father Andrew looked at me, his eyes filled with concern. This entity is feeding on fear. We need to remain strong. In the days that followed, the disturbances escalated. Lights flickered, objects moved on their own, and the oppressive feeling returned with a vengeance. Ellie began having nightmares, waking up screaming about the man in the attic. One night, I awoke to find her standing at the foot of our bed, her eyes wide with terror. "He's here," she whispered. "He's in the house." I jumped out of bed and checked every room, but there was no sign of an intruder. Still, the feeling of being watched was undeniable. Desperate for a solution, I began researching the history of our home. I discovered that before Thomas, the house had been owned by a man named Harold, who had mysteriously disappeared. Neighbors at the time spoke of strange occurrences and a sense of dread that permeated the property. It seemed our home had a long history of darkness. Determined to protect my family, I decided to confront the entity directly. That night, I climbed into the attic alone, flashlight in hand. "Whoever you are," I said aloud, "you are not welcome here. This is our home now, and we will not live in fear." The air grew colder, and a low growl echoed through the space. I stood my ground, repeating the words until the growling ceased. As I descended the ladder, I felt a sense of resolve. I would not let this entity control our lives. The following morning, Ellie handed me another drawing. This one depicted our family standing together, holding hands with the house in the background. The attic window was empty. Beneath the drawing were the words, "He knows you're not afraid." I smiled, tears welling in my eyes. Perhaps by facing our fear, we had weakened the entity's hold. But deep down, I knew the battle wasn't over. The darkness still lingered, waiting for an opportunity to return. We really have no idea what is going on, but I'll come back here and post if anything else happens. Please pray for us.